As my husband cheerfully prepared dinner for the entire family, a chilling message flashed across my phone. Do not eat. He put something in your bowl. Get out now. At first, I thought it was a cruel prank, but as the evening unfolded, I realized someone at that table was hiding a terrifying secret. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful crisis management CEO, I escaped their toxicity, but maintained occasional contact. Tonight, they invited themselves to my upscale Buckhead estate to catch up. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Atlanta meant privilege to outsiders, but inside our sprawling home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our house was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom became my sanctuary and my prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A's and joined honor societies. I was always the dark-skinned, fierce, independent daughter who was expected to carry the heavy burdens. I was forced into the role of the strong black woman, the financial mule who fixed every problem. My success was never celebrated by my parents. It was only tolerated and exploited. Tonight was supposed to be a simple dinner party. My husband Julian was holding court in my massive chef-style kitchen. Julian is 34 years old, a mid-level bank manager who always dresses perfectly and knows exactly what to say to charm a room. To the outside world, he is the ultimate supportive black husband. He was laughing loudly, pouring expensive wine, and stirring a massive pot of his famous Louisiana seafood gumbo. The rich, spicy aroma filled the dining room, but the atmosphere around the custom mahogany table was suffocating. My mother Vivian sat to my right. At 58 years old, she is a proud member of her prestigious sorority, always draped in her signature pearls and projecting an image of absolute high society perfection. To her, appearances are everything. My father Gerald sat at the head of the table. He is the 60-year-old charismatic pastor of a prominent Atlanta megachurch. He uses his booming pulpit voice to command obedience and mask his own deep moral failings. Directly across from me sat my younger sister Khloe. She is 29 years old and the undeniable golden child of our family. As a light-skinned former pageant queen from Spelman College, she was raised to believe the world owes her everything. She is currently unemployed, living a life of high society illusions, funded by credit cards and manipulation. Beside her sat her husband Darius. He is a 35-year-old, highly intelligent chief financial officer from a wealthy legacy family. Darius is quiet and observant. He rarely speaks at these family dinners, secretly exhausted by his wife's superficial lifestyle. Julian emerged from the kitchen carrying a large silver tray. He served everyone with a dazzling smile, making sure to place a very specific steaming bowl of gumbo directly in front of me. The broth was dark and rich, loaded with shrimp and crab. Julian took his seat next to me, his eyes locked onto my hands. He watched me with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Go ahead, baby," Julian said softly. "I made this batch especially for you." I picked up my heavy silver spoon. Just as the metal touched the surface of the hot soup, my Apple Watch vibrated sharply against my wrist. I glanced down at the small glowing screen. The text message was from an unknown number. "Do not eat. He put something in your bowl. Get out now." My heart slammed against my ribs. A cold wave of adrenaline washed over my entire body. My professional instincts as a crisis management expert instantly kicked in. In my line of work, panic is a luxury that gets people destroyed. You do not react, you assess, you pivot, and you survive. I kept my breathing perfectly steady. I did not look at my phone again. I did not look at Julian. I only stared at the bowl of gumbo. If the text was real, consuming even one spoonful could be catastrophic. I needed to destroy the bowl without raising suspicion. I needed to make it look like an embarrassing accident. I brought the spoon close to my mouth and suddenly inhaled sharply, faking a violent, uncontrollable coughing fit. I gasped for air, bringing my hands up to my chest. In the process, I intentionally threw my elbow forward, slamming it hard into the side of the heavy porcelain bowl. The bowl flipped over, crashing onto the table. Scalding hot gumbo washed over the edge, splattering across my expensive silk dress and pouring down onto the pristine hand-woven Persian rug below. The dark broth stained everything it touched. "Oh my goodness," I gasped, continuing to cough loudly and pressing a napkin to my chest. "I am so sorry." It went down the wrong pipe. I expected someone to jump up. I expected my husband to ask if the boiling liquid had burned my skin. I expected my mother to offer me a towel. Instead, the callous priority of my family reared its ugly head. Vivian slammed her crystal wine glass onto the table and clicked her tongue in absolute disgust. She did not even look at my ruined dress. "Nia, honestly," my mother scolded, her voice dripping with venom. "Julian spent hours cooking this meal, and you are acting like a clumsy child. You can never just be a graceful wife, can you? You always have to ruin a beautiful moment with your carelessness." I stood up, hot soup dripping down my legs, and stared at the woman who gave birth to me. Not a single ounce of maternal concern existed in her eyes, only irritation that her perfect dinner party aesthetic had been disrupted. Khloe chimed in immediately, seizing the opportunity to kick me while I was down. She stroked the leather of her brand new designer bag, a bag I knew Darius could barely afford right now. "She is just too masculine and stressed out from her little crisis job." "Mom," Khloe mocked, rolling her eyes. "She is always so tense. Nia does not know how to appreciate a good man cooking for her. Maybe if you softened up a bit, you would not be such a disaster at the dinner table." The sheer audacity of their insults stung, but I pushed the hurt down. My focus darted to Julian. Julian was not looking at the mess on the floor. He was staring at the empty, overturned bowl. His face had gone completely pale. The charming smile had vanished, replaced by a look of absolute terrifying panic. His eyes darted wildly from the spilled liquid to my face. He had lost control of the situation. The substance in the soup was gone. He quickly forced his mask back into place, jumping up from his chair with an overly aggressive display of fake concern. He grabbed a cloth napkin and reached for me. "Baby, are you okay?" Julian asked, his voice noticeably higher than usual. "Let me help you clean that up. I can go to the kitchen and get you another bowl right now. You need to eat." "Do not touch me," I said firmly, stepping back from his outstretched hands. I kept my tone even, masking the terror vibrating through my veins. "I am completely fine. I just need to go upstairs and clean myself up. The dress is ruined. I need to make sure you get some food in your system." Julian pressed, stepping closer. "I will bring a fresh bowl up to the bedroom for you." "No, Julian." I insisted, turning my back on him and the rest of my toxic family. "I have lost my appetite. Just stay here and entertain our guests. I will be right back." I walked out of the dining room with measured, deliberate steps. I did not run, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to sprint out the front door. I climbed the grand staircase, feeling the weight of their judgment and Julian's panicked stare burning into my back. Once I reached the second floor, I moved quickly down the hallway and slipped into the massive master bathroom. I pushed the heavy oak door shut and turned the deadbolt until it clicked solidly into place. I backed away from the door, my breathing finally turning ragged. I stood alone in the cold marble bathroom, staring at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The dark gumbo stained my clothes, smelling strongly of spices and something else, something sharp and chemical that I had not noticed downstairs. My husband had just tried to poison me in my own home, surrounded by a family that would gladly watch me fall if it meant preserving their pristine image. I reached into my pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out my phone. I stared at the warning message again. It was time to find out exactly who was trying to save my life, and exactly what kind of monster I had married. As I pulled up the unknown number on my phone screen, the initial wave of sheer terror had entirely burned away, replaced by the freezing, absolute clarity that had built my career. I did not shake. I did not hesitate. I tapped the call button and pressed the device against my ear, listening to the hollow ringtone echo in the quiet marble bathroom. The heavy oak door stood like a physical barricade between me and the monster wearing my husband's face downstairs. On the second ring, the line clicked open. A woman was sobbing on the other end, taking ragged, frantic breaths. The sound was desperate, the kind of absolute panic that cannot be faked. "Who is this?" I demanded, keeping my voice pitched low and entirely devoid of emotion. "Please," the woman gasped, her voice trembling violently. "Please tell me you did not eat the gumbo. Tell me you are safe." "I did not eat it." "Who are you, and how do you know what my husband is serving for dinner?" A loud, shaky exhale came through the speaker. "My name is Sierra. I am 24. I work as an intern at the downtown bank branch. Julian is my manager." She paused, the weight of her next words catching in her throat. "And I am his mistress. I have been sleeping with him for 6 months." Under normal circumstances, a wife hearing that her husband had a mistress would shatter. I simply cataloged the information as another variable in an unfolding crisis. The affair was irrelevant compared to the poisoned broth currently soaking into my dining room rug. "Sierra, listened to me very carefully," I said, shifting into the exact tone I used when advising billionaires facing federal indictments. "You bypassed simply warning me about an affair and went straight to telling me my food was spiked. Tell me exactly what you know right now." She choked back another sob. "I was at his office late this evening. Julian had already left for the day to cook for your family dinner. He left his private leather briefcase unlocked under his desk. I was looking for a pen, Nia. I swear. I just opened the side pocket, but I found a folder inside. A thick red folder with your name written across the front." "What was in the folder, Sierra?" "It was a life insurance policy." She cried out, her panic escalating. "A massive policy. He took it out just 2 weeks ago. He insured your life for $5 million, Nia. He is the sole beneficiary, and the policy includes an accelerated payout clause for sudden accidental death or fatal medical complications." My eyes locked onto my own reflection in the vanity mirror. $5 million. Julian, the man who kissed my forehead every morning and told me I worked too hard, had placed a $5 million bounty on my head. But the gumbo was not a fatal dose of poison. If he wanted me dead for the insurance money, slipping something into a shared family meal with witnesses everywhere was sloppy. It did not make sense. "There has to be something else," I pressed, gripping the edge of the marble sink. "A $5 million policy does not explain the warning about my food. What else was in that briefcase?" Sierra let out a terrifying wail. "Receipts." There were crumpled receipts from a black market clinic operating out of a warehouse in Decatur. I looked up the medications listed on the printouts because the names looked strange. Nia, they were high-dose abortifacients. Illegal industrial strength chemicals used to terminate pregnancies, mixed with heavy animal tranquilizers and sedatives. He bought them yesterday in cash. The air vanished from the bathroom. The floor beneath my feet felt as though it had violently dropped away. My hands flew to my stomach, pressing flat against the silk fabric of my ruined dress. I was exactly 8 weeks pregnant. It was a secret I had guarded fiercely. After years of my mother making snide remarks about my biological clock and my father preaching about the duties of a barren wife, I had finally seen a positive test. I had only told Julian 4 days ago. He had cried. He had spun me around the kitchen, kissing my face, swearing he would be the greatest father in the world. He had spent the entire weekend researching cribs and painting color swatches on the spare room wall. It was all a performance, a sickening, calculated performance. He did not want to be a father. He wanted to use the chemicals to murder my unborn child and sedate me into a stupor tonight, right in front of my deeply religious, judgmental family. I did not break down. The maternal instinct, fiercely merging with my survival instinct, created something lethal inside me. I pulled my secondary corporate phone from my pocket and swiftly swiped to the voice memo application. I hit the bright red record button, ensuring every single word of this conversation would be preserved in high-definition audio. "Sierra, Y, am recording this call for my own legal protection," I stated firmly. "I need you to tell me why Julian is doing this. A man does not buy black market abortion pills and a $5 million life insurance policy just to upgrade his lifestyle. He is running from something." "What is it?" "He is going to kill me if he finds out I looked in that folder," she sobbed, completely unraveling. "He is not going to touch you," I commanded. injecting absolute authority into my voice to stabilize her. I run a private security firm alongside my crisis management company. You will be protected, but you must tell me his motive right now. It is the Russian bookies. Sierra confessed the truth, finally spilling out in a terrified rush. Julian does not just manage bank accounts, he gambles. He has been gambling offshore for 3 years. He owes nearly $2 million to an underground syndicate operating out of Miami. They gave him a deadline of the end of the month. If he does not pay the $2 million, they promise to dismember him. I saw the threatening text messages on his iPad. Nia. He is desperate. He is completely cornered. The entire grand illusion of my marriage snapped into sharp, brutal focus. The late nights at the office, the sudden mood swings, the mysterious cash withdrawals he claimed were for surprise anniversary gifts that never materialized. Julian was not the perfect supportive black husband. He was a degenerate gambler facing a death sentence, and he had decided my life was the currency he would use to buy his way out. What was his exact plan for tonight, I asked, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. The sedatives, Sierra explained rapidly. He planned to drug you at dinner in front of your parents and your sister. He wanted them to witness you acting erratic, confused, and unstable. Once the abortifacients triggered the miscarriage, he was going to blame the trauma on your intense corporate job. He already drafted medical proxy documents. I saw them in the briefcase. He plans to have you declared mentally unfit and committed to a psychiatric facility for your own safety. Once he has medical and financial power of attorney, he can drain your corporate accounts to pay off the syndicate. And if you fight back or if the money is not enough, he plans to arrange an accident to collect the $5 million life insurance. I closed my eyes. The sheer depravity of the scheme was breathtaking. He was going to murder our child, drug me into a state of psychosis, parade my drugged body in front of my mother, who already thought I was a failure, and then lock me in an asylum so he could steal the empire I had built with my own blood, sweat, and tears. And if I resisted, he would simply kill me. Sierra, you did the right thing by calling me, I said, opening my eyes. The woman looking back at me in the mirror was no longer a victim. She was a predator preparing for a hunt. I need you to take photos of every single document in that briefcase. The insurance policy, the clinic receipts, the medical proxy papers. Send them to this number via encrypted message immediately. Then, pack a bag and leave your apartment. I am sending a private security detail to pick you up and stash you at a safe house. Do you understand? Yes, she whispered. Thank you. I am so sorry, Nia. Stay alive, Sierra. We will talk later. I ended the call and saved the audio recording directly to my secure cloud server. I set the secondary phone down on the marble vanity and turned the hot water on in the sink. I splashed the scalding water against my face, washing away the expensive makeup I had applied for my family dinner. I looked at the dark gumbo stains ruining the front of my silk dress. I allowed myself exactly 5 seconds of grief. I thought of the tiny, fragile life growing inside me, the life Julian had planned to aggressively terminate tonight. A single tear escaped my right eye, sliding down my cheek and dripping into the sink. I wiped it away with the back of my hand. There would be no more crying. There would only be execution. I picked up my corporate phone and opened an encrypted messaging channel connected directly to the head of my private security detail and my lead corporate attorney. I typed a single decisive message: Initiate Protocol Black. My husband is attempting murder and financial theft. Secure the perimeter of my Buckhead estate immediately. Lock down all joint bank accounts. Bring the Atlanta Police Department to my residence in exactly 1 hour. Do not use sirens. Wait for my signal. I hit send and watched the message turn green, confirming receipt. The trap was set. Julian thought he was dealing with a naive, submissive wife who would easily fall victim to his drugs and manipulation. He thought my family's relentless criticism would break my spirit. He was about to find out exactly why I was the highest-paid crisis manager in the state of Georgia. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped out into the hallway, leaving the terrified, betrayed wife locked inside that room forever. I walked toward the grand staircase, a cold, lethal smile spreading across my face. It was time to return to the dinner table. It was time to look the devil in the eye and serve him exactly what he deserved. I walked down the grand staircase of my Buckhead estate with deliberate, measured grace. I had changed out of the ruined silk and slipped into a tailored emerald green sheath dress, the exact armor I typically wore during hostile corporate takeovers. My heels clicked rhythmically against the imported hardwood floor, a steady countdown to the absolute destruction I was about to unleash upon the people sitting in my dining room. As I entered the space, the lively conversation abruptly halted. My mother, Vivian, was mid-sentence loudly complaining about the subpar catering at her latest Alpha Kappa Alpha alumni luncheon. She eyed my new dress with a look of visible irritation, clearly annoyed that my quick recovery had interrupted her prime opportunity to mock my supposed clumsiness. Khloe was busy taking a selfie with her fresh flute of expensive champagne, making sure her designer accessories were perfectly framed in the shot, while my father Gerald swirled his sweet tea looking entirely checked out. Julian immediately jumped up from his chair at the head of the table. The sheer panic I had witnessed earlier was now perfectly masked behind his bright manufactured smile, a smile that had fooled me for years. He hurried toward the sprawling chef-style kitchen and returned seconds later, carrying a fresh steaming bowl of his famous Louisiana seafood gumbo. He set it down at my place setting with an exaggerated, performative display of husbandly care. "I brought you a backup bowl, baby," Julian said, his voice dripping with synthetic sweetness that made my skin crawl. "You barely had a single bite before your little accident. You really need to eat. You have been working so incredibly hard lately, and you need your strength." I looked down at the dark, rich broth. I knew exactly what was swirling inside that innocent-looking bowl. Industrial strength chemicals, animal sedatives, black market abortifacients, a lethal cocktail meant to murder my unborn child and destroy my sanity in one fell swoop. I looked up at Julian, meeting his gaze directly. I smiled, letting the warmth reach my eyes in a flawless, chilling imitation of a grateful, oblivious wife. "That is so incredibly sweet of you, Julian," I said, my voice as smooth and reflective as glass. I picked up the fresh bowl of gumbo with both hands, feeling the heat radiate through the porcelain. "But you spent the entire afternoon slaving away in the kitchen for my family. You worked so hard to make this evening perfect for us. You absolutely deserve the best." Before his sluggish, guilty mind could process my movement, I smoothly slid his half-eaten bowl of gumbo out of his way and placed the fresh, chemically spiked bowl directly in front of him. I took his original bowl and set it down firmly in front of myself, picking up my silver spoon. "You cooked honey," I insisted, pulling my chair in and sitting down with perfect posture. "You take the biggest portion. Go ahead. Eat it while it is hot." Julian froze completely. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying to witness. His charming, supportive husband facade evaporated into thin air, leaving his face slack gray and completely terrified. His eyes locked onto the bowl, sitting mere inches from his chest, like it was a live, explosive device. A thick bead of sweat formed at his temple, sliding slowly down the side of his perfectly groomed face. His hands, resting heavily on either side of his placemat, began to tremble so violently that the silverware rattled against the table. "Eat, Julian," I urged again, my tone remaining entirely pleasant and conversational. "It is your famous recipe. My father loves it. My mother loves it. You should really enjoy the fruits of your labor." Julian swallowed hard, the sound loud in the suddenly quiet room. His Adam's apple bobbed nervously. He reached out with a shaking right hand, his fingers hovering over the silver spoon, but he could not bring himself to touch the metal. The psychological barrier of knowing exactly what deadly toxins were swimming in that dark broth paralyzed his body completely. Suddenly, he lurched backward with terrifying force. His heavy dining chair scraped violently against the floorboards, emitting a loud, harsh screech that echoed sharply through the dining room. He forcefully pushed the bowl away from him, treating it like venom. The dark liquid sloshed heavily over the rim, staining his pristine white French cuffs and bleeding into the table runner. "I lost my appetite!" Julian stammered, his voice cracking and pitching upward in sheer panic. He wiped his sweaty forehead with the back of his trembling hand, his breathing shallow and rapid, his chest heaving under his tailored shirt. I tasted way too much of it while I was cooking in the kitchen. I am completely full. I just cannot eat another bite. Vivian sighed loudly, rolling her eyes with theatrical exasperation. Julian, do not let Nia bully you in your own home. If you want to eat, eat. If she wants to play games and give up her food, let her starve. She has always been overly controlling and difficult. I am not hungry, Vivian. Julian snapped, a genuine flash of panic and raw anger breaking through his carefully constructed facade. He was rapidly losing control of the narrative, and the Russian syndicate's $2 million deadline was breathing heavily down his neck. He desperately needed me incapacitated tonight. He needed the medical proxy signed. He needed the keys to my corporate empire. He quickly realized that the poisoned soup strategy had catastrophically failed. He had to pivot immediately to the psychological warfare he had prepared as his backup plan. Julian stood up, gripping the ornate back of his dining chair so tightly his knuckles turned a stark, bony white. He looked at my parents, rapidly adopting an expression of deep, tragic, agonizing concern. He was seamlessly shifting into the role of the exhausted, long-suffering husband, valiantly trying to save his mentally unstable wife from herself. Gerald, Vivian Julian began, his voice shaking with a masterful display of feigned emotion. I really did not want to bring this up during a family dinner, but I am at my absolute wit's end. I need your help with Nia. She is not well. Something is deeply wrong with her. My father finally looked up from his iced tea, his pastoral instincts instantly kicking in as he sensed the incoming drama. What do you mean? Julian Gerald asked, clasping his hands together on the table and leaning forward. What exactly is going on in this house? It is her job. Julian lied smoothly, pacing nervously behind his chair, running a hand through his hair. This intense CEO lifestyle is destroying her mind. The pressure is breaking her. She has been experiencing severe delusions for weeks, extreme paranoia. She wakes up in the middle of the night screaming about corporate espionage and people trying to ruin her. She thinks strangers are following her. The incident earlier with the soup was not an accident. She threw it on purpose because she has been having violent manic episodes. I sat perfectly still, silently observing this terrifying masterclass in gaslighting. If I had not spoken to Sierra in the bathroom, if I did not know about the black market abortion pills, the staggering gambling debt, and the $5 million life insurance policy, his phenomenal performance might have actually made me question my own reality. He was weaponizing the immense pressure of my career against me. It is breaking my heart to watch the woman I love lose her grip on reality. Julian continued, wiping a fake dramatic tear from his eye. She flatly refuses to see a doctor. She is completely erratic and dangerous. For her own safety, and for the safety of her company's assets, I think she needs professional inpatient intervention. She needs to be institutionalized for a few weeks to undergo a full psychiatric evaluation. She needs a heavy regimen of rest and medication to stabilize her brain. Khloe gasped loudly, covering her perfectly glossed mouth with her hand in mock horror, though her eyes gleamed with undisguised malicious delight. Oh my God, Nia! Have you really gone crazy? Is the pressure finally cracking that tough exterior? Julian stepped closer to my father, leaning heavily on the religious patriarchal dynamic he knew governed my family's every decision. Pastor Gerald, I love your daughter more than life itself, but she is simply not in her right mind to manage her business or her massive financial assets right now. I have prepared some legal documents, a medical proxy and a comprehensive financial power of attorney. If she signs them over to me tonight, I can handle the agency, pay her bills, and ensure she gets the discreet psychiatric care she desperately needs without creating a humiliating public scandal for your church. I just want to protect her from ruining her own life. I slowly turned my gaze to my parents, waiting for the righteous protective indignation to ignite. I waited for my mother to fiercely defend my brilliant, flawless career. I waited for her to remind Julian that I built a multi-million-dollar crisis management empire from the ground up, that I was the most sharp, calculating, and lucid woman in the entire city of Atlanta. I waited for my father, a man of God, to demand actual medical proof before allowing a man to lock his eldest daughter in a psychiatric ward and strip her of her wealth. Instead, I witnessed the true, horrifying, bottomless depths of my family's betrayal. Vivian immediately nodded, her face settling into a mask of grim, self-righteous satisfaction. She did not look concerned for my mental well-being. She looked immensely relieved that someone had finally found a socially acceptable way to put me in my place. Julianne is absolutely right, Nia, my mother stated, her tone dripping with toxic condescension and internalized misogynoir. You have always been far too aggressive. You have always pushed too hard, trying to act like a ruthless man in a man's world. I told you years ago that running that crisis firm would eventually ruin your spirit and break your mind. A strong Black woman knows exactly when to step down, humble herself, and let her husband lead the household. You have completely exhausted your mind chasing corporate money instead of tending to your wifely duties. My father chimed in right on cue, using his booming, authoritative church voice to validate the horrific criminal trap my husband was setting. Nia, submission to your husband is not a weakness, Gerald preached, pointing a thick, accusing finger at me across the mahogany table. It is a strict biblical mandate. Julian is your head. If he says you are struggling with delusions and paranoia, then you must humble yourself before the Lord and accept his loving guidance. You cannot fight this mental battle alone with a broken, arrogant mind. Signing over your financial power of attorney is the right, godly thing to do. Let Julian bear the heavy, stressful burden of your business while you seek spiritual and mental healing in a facility. The realization hit my chest with the devastating force of a freight train. They were not oblivious. They were not being cleverly tricked by Julian's phenomenal acting skills. They were actively, eagerly, and willingly complicit in stripping me of my agency and my freedom. They deeply resented my success because my massive financial independence meant they could never truly control me. My mother hated that my self-made wealth entirely overshadowed her superficial country club status. My father hated that I did not need his pastoral approval or his church's charity to thrive in this world. Khloe hated that I had earned my sprawling mansion and luxury cars through sheer intellect while she had to beg and manipulate men for designer bags. They were perfectly happy to label me violently insane. They were thrilled at the prospect of locking me away in a padded room. They were eager to hand the keys to my empire directly over to Julian simply because it restored the patriarchal, toxic hierarchy they vastly preferred. They did not care if I was actually sick. They only cared that my removal from power elevated their own standing and punished me for daring to outshine them. I sat at the head of my table, surrounded by the people who shared my exact blood, and I felt nothing but absolute freezing surgical detachment. The vulnerable woman, who had spent 32 years desperately craving their parental approval, was completely dead, murdered by the horrific realization that my own parents would gladly watch me be lobotomized and robbed just to satisfy their fragile egos. I slowly picked up my clean linen napkin and wiped my mouth, carefully hiding the lethal predatory smile forming on my lips. They had absolutely no idea that I held the match that was going to burn this entire family to ash. I let my shoulders slump forward, deliberately stripping the rigid corporate posture from my spine. If they wanted a broken, unstable woman, I would give them an Oscar-worthy performance. I allowed a tremor to enter my hands as I placed my napkin on the table, lowering my gaze to project absolute exhaustion. I pressed my fingertips against my temples, rubbing in slow, circular motions as if fighting off a debilitating migraine. "Maybe you are right," I whispered, keeping my voice fragile and thin. "Maybe the pressure is finally getting to me. The agency has been overwhelming lately. I cannot sleep. My mind is constantly racing." "But Julian, why do you need immediate total control of my corporate financial accounts? A simple medical proxy would allow you to check me into a facility. Why the rush to transfer my entire financial portfolio into your name tonight?" The dining room grew dangerously quiet. Julian shifted his weight, his perfectly tailored suit suddenly looking restrictive. He opened his mouth to formulate a lie, but my father intervened. Gerald cleared his throat, a deep, resonant sound that commanded the attention of everyone in his congregation every Sunday morning. He sat up straighter, adjusting the lapels of his custom Italian suit, preparing to deliver a sermon tailored specifically for my subjugation. Nia, my child, Gerald began dropping his voice into that soothing, authoritative pastoral cadence he used to extract tithes from grieving widows. The Lord commands us to bear one another's burdens. Your husband is trying to shield you from the crushing weight of the secular world. Proverbs teaches us to trust in the Lord with all our hearts and lean not on our own understanding. Right now, your understanding is clouded by sickness. You are questioning the motives of a righteous man who is stepping up to lead his household. I am not questioning his righteousness, Dad, I replied softly, playing the submissive daughter perfectly. I am simply asking why my company's operating capital needs to be handed over tonight. My payroll goes out next week. My legal team handles the day-to-day operations. Julian does not know the first thing about crisis management logistics. Vivian slammed her hand flat against the mahogany table, her heavy diamond rings clinking sharply against the wood. Because your father asked you to Nia. That is why. We are your family. We are trying to save your life, and you are sitting here interrogating us like we are hostile witnesses on a witness stand. This relentless masculine interrogation is exactly why your brain is fracturing. Actually, Gerald interrupted, raising a hand to silence my mother. He looked at Julian, sharing a dark conspiratorial glance that sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. There is another matter, a matter of family preservation, a matter of faith. I kept my eyes wide and deliberately vacant, silently urging him to confess his sins. What matter, Dad? Gerald sighed, bowing his head to project deep spiritual fatigue. The Greater Faith Fellowship is currently under attack by the enemy. We are facing a sudden, highly aggressive tax audit from the Internal Revenue Service. They are demanding an immediate review of our operational expenses over the last 5 years. It is a targeted racial attack against a prominent black church, clearly designed to tear down the kingdom we have built in Atlanta. I almost broke character to laugh in his face. The IRS does not target churches for no reason. They target churches when the pastor drives a brand new Bentley every year, lives in a $2 million parsonage, and funds his wife's lavish country club lifestyle using tax-exempt donations from working-class congregants. The auditors are claiming a discrepancy in our building fund. Gerald continued weaving his narrative with practiced ease. They are threatening to freeze the church's assets and launch a public federal investigation if we do not immediately settle a massive penalty by Monday morning. The sum is exactly $500,000. If the media gets hold of this, our reputation will be completely destroyed. The legacy I have built for this family will be dragged through the mud. I looked at Julian, the pieces of the puzzle locked together with devastating precision. And what does the church's tax penalty have to do with my financial power of attorney? Julian leaned forward, attempting to look heroic and deeply compassionate. Nia, your father came to us for help. He came to his family in his hour of greatest need. When he told me about the audit, I knew we had to step in. I promised him that we would cover the $500,000 penalty immediately. But because you have your assets locked up in that blind trust, and because your corporate accounts require your direct authorization, I cannot access the funds to save your father's church. We need the money by Monday. Nia, Vivian pressed, leaning across the table, her eyes wide with desperate, greedy entitlement. If you sign the power of attorney tonight, Julian can wire the $500,000 to the church accounts first thing tomorrow morning. He can save your father's ministry while you go away to rest and recover your mind. My breathing remained shallow, but my mind was operating at lightning speed, analyzing the raw, putrid truth hiding beneath their righteous religious language. Gerald had embezzled $500,000 from the Greater Faith Fellowship. He had stolen from his own congregation to fund Vivian's designer wardrobe, Khloe's useless pageant entries, and his own luxurious lifestyle. The IRS had caught him. He was facing imminent federal prison time and absolute public disgrace in the Atlanta elite social circle. He desperately needed a bailout. He could have come to me directly. He could have asked his wealthy CEO daughter for a loan. But my father knew exactly how I operated. I am a crisis manager. If a client asks me for $500,000 to pay off the IRSI, Demand a full, independent forensic audit of their books before I write the check. I would have uncovered his embezzlement immediately. I would have held him accountable. I would have demanded he step down from the pulpit. Julian knew this. Julian, drowning in his own $2 million gambling debt to the Russian syndicate, saw my father's desperation as the perfect opportunity. Julian approached my father with a devil's bargain. Julian promised to write the $500,000 check to the IRS, no questions asked, effectively covering up my father's financial crimes. In exchange, my father had to fully endorse and support Julian's horrific plan to declare me violently insane. My own parents were willingly participating in my institutionalization. They were enthusiastically helping my husband strip me of my constitutional rights, my freedom, and my multi-million-dollar company. They were aiding a man who had just tried to feed me black market abortion pills, all because Julian promised to pay them $500,000 of my own hard-earned money. They were selling me to a slaughterhouse to save their social standing. I stared at the three of them. My mother dripping in pearls bought with stolen tithes. My father hiding federal crimes behind a pastoral collar. My husband bargaining with my life to save himself from a cartel. They were a trinity of absolute evil sitting in my dining room eating the food my money had purchased. "I see," I whispered, letting a single tear fall down my cheek, playing the role of the broken, overwhelmed daughter perfectly. "You are just trying to protect the family, Julian. You are just trying to help my father save his church. And I have been sitting here being difficult." "You have just been sick, baby," Julian cooed, reaching out to stroke my hand. His touch sent a wave of physical nausea through my stomach, but I forced my muscles to remain relaxed. "Your mind is playing tricks on you, but I am here to carry the burden now. I will take care of the church. I will take care of your company. I will take care of everything. All you have to do is sign the papers and go to sleep." Khloe let out a dramatic, irritated sigh, examining her manicured fingernails. "Honestly, Nia just signed the stupid documents. Dad is literally facing a crisis, and you are making this all about your feelings. You are being entirely selfish. Julian is stepping up to save the family name, while you are throwing tantrums over a bowl of soup." I looked at my younger sister, the golden child, the woman who had never worked a hard day in her life, sitting there pregnant with my husband's child, calling me selfish. The level of delusion and entitlement radiating from her pores was almost fascinating to witness. She had no idea that Darius, her quiet, observant husband, had already discovered her infidelity. She had no idea that her entire glamorous world was constructed on a foundation of sand, and a massive tidal wave was currently rushing toward the shore. "You are right, Khloe," I said, my voice turning incredibly soft, almost a whisper. "I have been incredibly selfish. I should be focusing on the greater good of this family. I should be focusing on protecting our legacy." Gerald visibly relaxed, exhaling a loud breath of profound relief. "Praise the Lord," my father muttered, lifting his hands slightly toward the ceiling. "The Lord is softening your heart, Nia. He is clearing the dark clouds from your mind. Yielding to your husband's protection is the first step toward your total restoration." "We will find you a beautiful private facility," Vivian added quickly, already moving on to the logistics of hiding me away. "Somewhere discreet in the mountains. Nobody in our social circle ever needs to know you had a breakdown. We will simply tell the sorority and the church congregation that you went on an extended wellness retreat to Europe. Julian can handle your corporate clients. It will be completely seamless." They had planned every single detail. They had scripted my disappearance with terrifying efficiency. They were going to erase me from society, drain my assets, cover up their crimes, and live lavishly on the ruins of my empire. I slowly pulled my hand away from Julian's grasp, resting both of my hands politely in my lap. I looked around the room, burning the image of their smug, victorious faces into my memory. This was the exact moment they believed they had won. This was the exact moment they believed the strong black woman had finally been broken, tamed, and domesticated into submission. "Julian," I said, looking deeply into his lying, desperate eyes, "where are the legal documents? If I am going to step down and hand my entire life over to you tonight, I need to see exactly what I am signing." Julian's face lit up with an ugly, ravenous greed that he could no longer hide. He had the keys to the kingdom in his sights. He quickly stood up from the table, his chair scraping against the floor, and hurried toward his leather briefcase resting on the side console. The very same briefcase that held the clinic receipts, the $5 million life insurance policy, and the evidence of my impending murder. As he turned his back to retrieve his paperwork, I felt a slight deliberate shift in the air to my left. Darius, the quiet brother-in-law, the man who had been silently watching this entire macabre theater unfold, slowly pushed his chair back and stood up from the table. The execution was about to begin. Darius did not say a single word to Khloe. He did not look at Gerald or Vivian. He simply picked up his crystal glass of expensive bourbon, taking a slow, measured sip. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. The look in his dark eyes was absolute unyielding ice. It was the look of a man who had also reached his breaking point, a man who had meticulously calculated his own exit strategy from this circus of toxic blood-sucking parasites. "I am going to step out onto the patio for a smoke," Darius announced to the room, his voice deep and entirely unbothered by the heavy emotional manipulation that had just occurred. "I need some fresh air." "Darius." "Please," Khloe whined, reaching out to grab his suit jacket. "Do not leave right now. We are having a family moment. We are finally getting Nia sorted out. Stay here." "I said I need fresh air, Khloe." Darius repeated his tone, leaving absolutely no room for argument. He stepped away from her grasping hands, his posture rigid and commanding. As Darius walked behind my chair toward the heavy French doors leading to the outdoor patio, I felt a tiny, almost imperceptible brush against the silk fabric of my green dress. Something small, hard, and metallic slipped silently from his hand and landed directly in the center of my lap. I did not flinch. I did not look down. I kept my eyes locked on Julian, who was triumphantly walking back to the dining table holding a thick manila folder filled with my destruction. I casually placed my linen napkin over my lap, concealing the small object Darius had just delivered. My heart beat with a steady, lethal rhythm. The board was set. The players were in position. The trap was fully armed. My family believed they were burying me tonight, but they were actually digging their own graves. Julian placed the thick manila folder onto the mahogany table with a soft, authoritative thud. He smoothed his hands over the front cover, treating the cardboard like it was a sacred artifact that held his salvation. The silence in the dining room was dense thick with the unsaid threats and the suffocating weight of my family's expectations. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, feeling the sharp metallic edges of the USB drive Darius had dropped. It was a tiny physical anchor tethering me to reality, while my husband and parents attempted to drag me into a psychological abyss. Just as Julian opened his mouth to explain the legal parameters of his hostile takeover, the atmosphere shifted. Khloe, who had been impatiently tapping her manicured nails against her crystal water glass, let out a loud, theatrical sigh. The attention was not on her, and for the golden child of the family being ignored was a fate worse than death. She could not stand that the room was entirely focused on my supposed mental breakdown. She needed the spotlight back, and she knew exactly how to steal it. "Wait!" Khloe interrupted, her voice cutting through the heavy tension like a shrill bell. She stood up from her chair, smoothing her hands over the front of her expensive, form-fitting dress. "Before we get into all this depressing legal paperwork and hospital talk, I actually have some news of my own. Good news. Something that will finally bring some actual joy into this family." My mother, Vivian, immediately pivoted her attention away from me. The cold, calculating stare she had been directing at my face melted into a bright, eager expression of maternal devotion. "What is it, Khloe?" Vivian asked, her hands clasping together in anticipation. "Tell us, baby." Khloe smiled a wide, radiant, camera-ready grin that she had perfected during her pageant days at Spelman. She deliberately placed both of her hands over her slightly rounded stomach, rubbing the fabric with an exaggerated maternal gentleness. "I am 3 months pregnant," Khloe announced, her voice echoing off the high ceilings of my dining room. "I am going to have a baby." The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Vivian shrieked with absolute delight, knocking her chair backward as she rushed around the table to embrace her youngest daughter. She wrapped her arms tightly around Khloe, burying her face in Khloe's shoulder, weeping loud, joyous tears that were entirely absent when I was allegedly losing my mind just 5 minutes ago. Praise God, Vivian cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured religious fervor. Praise the Lord for this incredible blessing. I am going to be a grandmother. A real grandmother. My father Gerald stood up, his face splitting into a massive triumphant grin. He walked over to his golden child and placed a heavy pastoral hand on her head, closing his eyes, as if receiving a direct transmission from the heavens. This is the favor of the Lord. Gerald boomed, his voice echoing with righteous pride. The Lord has looked down upon this family in our moment of dark trial and delivered a miracle. He has opened your womb, Khloe. You are bringing a proper blessed legacy into this household. The subtle, venomous digs at my fertility were entirely intentional. They were not just celebrating Khloe, they were actively weaponizing her pregnancy against me. For years, Vivian and Gerald had made snide, passive-aggressive comments about my inability to conceive. They had whispered behind my back to their church congregation and their country club friends, suggesting that my high-powered career had cursed my womb. They viewed my success as a masculine trait that had stripped me of my natural womanly purpose. Vivian pulled back from Khloe, wiping her joyful tears, and immediately turned her gaze toward me. Her eyes were hard and gloating. You see, Nia, Vivian said, her tone dripping with toxic maternal condescension. This is what a woman is supposed to do. Khloe is fulfilling her biological destiny. She is not out here fighting in corporate boardrooms and losing her mind to stress. She is providing a future for this family. Maybe if you had focused more on your marriage and less on your bank accounts, you would be sharing this joy instead of packing your bags for a psychiatric ward. Gerald nodded in solemn agreement, standing firmly beside his favorite daughter. A fruitful vine is a blessing, Naya. Your sister has prioritized her home, and God has rewarded her. This baby is the light that will guide our family out of the darkness you have brought to our doorstep tonight. I sat perfectly still, absorbing their vicious, coordinated verbal assault. They were celebrating a pregnancy while actively helping my husband orchestrate a plan to murder the 8-week-old child growing inside my own body. The staggering, breathtaking hypocrisy of my parents was almost physical in its weight. They were perfectly willing to champion Khloe's motherhood while cheering on the destruction of mine. But I did not let their insults penetrate my armor. My focus was entirely locked on Julian. When a man learns that his brother-in-law is expecting a child, the normal reaction is polite congratulation. A hug, a handshake, a joyful exclamation. Julian did not offer any of those things. He did not rush over to congratulate the mother-to-be. He did not look around the room for Darius to shake his hand. Julian was standing perfectly still next to the table, clutching the manila folder. His reaction was not the reaction of an excited uncle. It was the reaction of a possessive, terrified, and cornered animal. His eyes were glued to Khloe's stomach. His jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle twitched violently in his cheek. His breathing had grown shallow and rapid again. I watched him with the hyper-observant, analytical gaze of a seasoned crisis manager. I analyzed every micro-expression, every tiny shift in his body language. Julian was not happy for his sister-in-law. He looked entirely proprietary. He looked like a man watching someone else handle his own property. Then it happened. The horrifying silent exchange that ripped the final veil from my eyes. Khloe, still basking in the glowing praise of our parents, briefly looked over her mother's shoulder. She locked eyes with Julian. It was a fleeting, microscopic moment, but in that single second, a massive, silent conversation passed between them. Khloe's eyes did not hold the innocent joy of a pregnant woman looking at her brother-in-law. Her gaze was intense, demanding, and intimately familiar. It was a look of shared conspiracy. Julian held her gaze, giving her a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of reassurance, a silent promise between two people who were deeply, inextricably entangled in something highly classified. The pieces of the nightmare puzzle snapped together in my mind with a loud, deafening crash. The sudden clarity was so sharp and blinding that it nearly took my breath away. Julian was $2 million in debt to a ruthless Russian gambling syndicate. He was facing dismemberment or death by the end of the month if he did not pay. He had seduced Sierra, the young bank intern, using her as a disposable pawn. But Sierra was just a distraction. Sierra was just someone he slept with because she was convenient. Khloe was the real endgame. Khloe was unemployed, living wildly beyond her means, constantly demanding designer clothes and luxury vacations that her quiet, observant husband Darius refused to fund. Khloe hated me. She had always hated that I held the financial power in the family. She had always wanted what I had, but lacked the intellect and the work ethic to build it herself. Julian and Khloe were not just in-laws. They were lovers. They were co-conspirators. The baby growing inside Khloe's stomach did not belong to Darius. Darius had just walked out to the patio and dropped a secret encrypted USB drive into my lap before disappearing. A man does not calmly walk away from his wife's joyful pregnancy announcement unless he knows the child is not his. Darius knew. He had figured it out. He had investigated them, gathered the evidence, handed it to me, and removed himself from the blast radius. Julian was the father of Khloe's baby. The dark, twisted reality of Julian's master plan finally made perfect sense. Julian did not just want to pay off his gambling debt. He wanted a completely new life. He wanted to discard me, the strong, aggressive wife who held the purse strings and demanded accountability. He wanted Khloe, the beautiful, compliant golden child who would blindly worship him as long as he provided her with my credit cards. He was going to drug me tonight. He was going to use those black market chemicals to induce a violent, traumatic miscarriage, murdering our 8-week-old baby right here in this house. He was going to use my resulting physical and emotional trauma to convince my parents that I had suffered a catastrophic psychotic break. He was going to force me into a psychiatric facility and strip away my medical and financial power of attorney. Once he controlled my crisis management firm and my multi-million-dollar portfolio, he was going to wire $500,000 to my corrupt father to cover up the church embezzlement. My parents, blinded by the money and their desire to protect their reputation, would gladly look the other way while I rotted in a padded cell. Julian would pay off the Russian syndicate, saving his own life. And then he would fund his new perfect life with Khloe. They would raise their child using my wealth. My parents would celebrate their golden daughter's beautiful family entirely funded by the empire I had built. I was just the sacrificial lamb they were preparing to slaughter on the altar of their greed. I sat in my chair, listening to the sickening, joyful laughter of my parents as they continued to hug the woman who was sleeping with my husband. I felt the cold, hard edges of the USB drive resting under my linen napkin. My blood felt like ice water. I did not feel sorrow. I did not feel heartbreak. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly evil, that it bypassed my emotions entirely and activated a dark, ruthless, predatory instinct deep within my core. They believed I was a broken woman on the verge of a mental collapse. They believed I was about to sign away my life and my fortune simply because my husband and my parents demanded submission. They had vastly underestimated the monster they had created. I looked at Julian, who was still staring at Khloe's stomach with that sickening, proprietary gaze. I looked at my mother, who was practically glowing with the satisfaction of my impending downfall. I looked at my father, who was preparing to sell my freedom for $500,000. I was not going to a psychiatric ward tonight. I was going to war. And by the time the sun rose over Atlanta tomorrow morning, every single person in this dining room was going to be utterly, completely, and permanently destroyed. I kept my expression perfectly serene, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make Julian shift uncomfortably on his feet. He stood there, clutching the manila folder, his knuckles white, desperate to secure his salvation. Underneath my linen napkin, my fingers traced the cold metal of the flash drive Darius had dropped. It was a weapon, handed to me by the only other person in this house who saw through the sickening facade. Julian, I said, pitching my voice to a soft, compliant register. If I am going to sign over complete control of my crisis management firm and my personal assets, I need to do it properly. My corporate seal and my legal reading glasses are locked in my home office. I will not sign a document of this magnitude with a standard ballpoint pen like a careless amateur. I will be right back. Julian frowned, a flicker of panic crossing his features. Baby, you do not need your corporate seal for this. This is just a standard medical proxy and a financial power of attorney. We can notarize it tomorrow. Just use my pen. Vivian sighed, waving her hand dismissively at me. Nia stopped stalling. Your husband is trying to help you. Your father needs that church audit handled by Monday morning. Stop being so difficult and just sign the papers. I stood up slowly, letting the napkin fall to my chair, while keeping the USB drive securely hidden in the palm of my hand. I am not stalling, Mom. I am simply ensuring the legal transition of my multi-million-dollar empire is airtight. If Julian takes over my accounts without the proper corporate authentication, the bank will freeze everything pending an investigation. Do you want the IRS to seize the Greater Faith Fellowship because of a clerical error? That immediately shut my mother up. Gerald cleared his throat, nodding vigorously. Let her get the seal, Julian. We must render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. We need the funds cleared without any bureaucratic delays. Julian swallowed hard, realizing he could not argue against the financial logistics without looking suspicious. He offered a tight, strained smile. Make it quick, baby. You need to rest. I turned and walked away from the dining room, my heels clicking softly against the floor. I kept my posture relaxed until I turned the corner into the west wing of the estate. Then my entire demeanor hardened. I moved with the swift, lethal precision of a predator closing in on its prey. I reached my home office, stepped inside, and pushed the heavy mahogany door shut, locking the deadbolt with a solid click. My office was my sanctuary. It was a room built on my own intellect, featuring floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive walnut desk, and secure servers that handled sensitive data for some of the most powerful people in Atlanta. I walked directly to my desk, woke up my encrypted laptop, and inserted the small metallic USB drive Darius had given me. A password prompt immediately flashed on the screen. I did not have to guess. Darius was a brilliant chief financial officer, a man who spoke the same corporate language I did. I typed in the name of the high-end bourbon he had just poured himself before walking out to the patio. The screen unlocked instantly. What I saw on the drive was a masterclass in forensic accounting. Darius had not just suspected his wife of infidelity. He had meticulously, clinically dismantled her entire existence. He had compiled a digital execution file, and he had handed it to me because he knew I was the only person ruthless enough to pull the trigger. I opened the first folder labeled with Julian's initials. My eyes scanned the spreadsheets Darius had constructed. It was a complete financial autopsy of my husband. Julian was not just a mid-level bank manager. He was a spectacular, catastrophic failure. The documents detailed offshore wire transfers to dummy corporations in Miami, shell companies tied directly to a known Russian gambling syndicate. The debt was staggering, $1.8 million in losses over 3 years, compounding with astronomical interest rates. Darius had even managed to secure screenshots of encrypted text messages sent to Julian's burner phone. The messages were brutal, threatening Julian with physical dismemberment if the debt was not settled by the end of the current month. That explained the $5 million life insurance policy. That explained the black market abortion pills. Julian was quite literally backed into a lethal corner, and he had decided my life was the acceptable collateral damage to save his own skin. I clicked on the second folder labeled with Khloe's name. A wave of absolute disgust washed over me as the files populated the screen. They were high-resolution scans of hotel receipts, luxury resort bookings, and private charter flights. For the past 2 years, Khloe had been taking frequent girls' trips and sorority alumni retreats to Miami, Las Vegas, and the Bahamas. Darius had cross-referenced Khloe's travel dates with Julian's corporate travel log. They matched perfectly. Every single time Julian claimed he was attending a regional banking conference, he was actually spending my money to fund a lavish secret vacation with my sister. He had been swiping my secondary business credit cards, funneling the money through untraceable vendor accounts to buy Khloe designer bags, expensive jewelry, and 5-star hotel suites. They had been laughing at me. They had been sleeping together in luxury beds paid for by my grueling 80-hour work weeks. My sister, the golden child who looked down on my career, was perfectly happy to play the role of a high society princess while being entirely funded by the very woman she mocked. But the third folder was the true smoking gun. It was the nuclear warhead Darius had saved for last. The folder was simply labeled medical. I double-clicked the icon, my heart beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. The document that appeared on the screen was a certified laboratory report from one of the most exclusive fertility clinics in Atlanta. It was a comprehensive semen analysis and genetic panel conducted on Darius just 3 weeks ago. I read the clinical conclusion at the bottom of the page. The diagnosis was absolute. Darius suffered from a severe, irreversible genetic condition. He was entirely sterile. His sperm count was absolute 0. He had 0 chance of ever fathering a child naturally. I sat back in my leather ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing screen. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was almost suffocating, but it was eclipsed by the profound, chilling brilliance of Darius. Darius had known he was sterile. When Khloe proudly stood up in my dining room, rubbing her stomach and announcing she was 3 months pregnant, she expected her wealthy husband to weep with joy. She expected my parents to praise her. She expected to secure her position as the ultimate fruitful matriarch of the family. Instead, she had unknowingly signed her own death warrant. Darius had sat at that table listening to his wife claim she was carrying his miracle baby, knowing with absolute scientific certainty that she was lying to his face. He had watched Julian stare at Khloe's stomach with that sickening, possessive gaze. Darius had put the pieces together long before tonight. He had conducted the forensic audit. He had tracked the hotel receipts. He had proven the affair. And instead of screaming, crying, or throwing a tantrum like a fragile victim, Darius had poured himself a glass of expensive bourbon, walked past my chair, and handed me the loaded gun. He knew I was a crisis manager. He knew I handled hostile takeovers, corporate sabotage, and reputation destruction for a living. He knew that if he handed this information to me, I would not just divorce Julian. I would annihilate the entire family structure that had enabled this betrayal. Darius and I were the outsiders in this toxic, image-obsessed family. We were the financial providers, the dark-skinned workhorses expected to fund the glittering, superficial lives of Vivian, Gerald, and Khloe. Tonight, the workhorses were burning the stable down. I minimized the folders and quickly transferred the entire contents of the USB drive to my secure encrypted corporate cloud server. I could not risk Julian discovering the physical drive. The data was now locked behind enterprise-grade security firewalls, accessible only by my biometric scan. I pulled out my secondary phone. I had already initiated Protocol Black, dispatching my private security detail and the Atlanta police to my estate. But now the strategy had evolved. This was no longer just about protecting myself from a murderous husband. This was about executing a flawless, synchronized financial and social ruin. I opened a secure messaging application and typed a message to Darius, who was still supposedly smoking a cigar on my outdoor patio. Files received and secured. The financial data is breathtaking. You are a brilliant man, Darius. I have locked down my assets. What is your status? The response came through less than 10 seconds later. Darius was ready. I froze her black card 20 minutes ago. My legal team filed the divorce papers electronically an hour before we arrived at your house. The prenup infidelity clause is fully activated. She walks away with 0. Burn it all down, Nia. I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. Give me exactly 15 minutes, I texted back. Wait for my signal. I opened a new message thread to my lead corporate attorney. I gave the final irrevocable orders. Execute the emergency blind trust transfer. Liquidate the joint checking accounts immediately. Flag Julian's corporate access as hostile. Do not leave a single dime for him to access. Next, I wired $50,000 from a secure offshore account directly to Sierra, the terrified bank intern who had warned me about the poisoned gumbo. She was my star witness against Julian's insurance fraud and attempted murder charges. I sent her a brief message. Funds transferred. My security team is 20 minutes away from your location. They will relocate you to the safe house. Do not speak to anyone until my lawyers arrive. Everything was in place. The trap was armed, the escape routes were sealed, and the executioners were ready. I took a deep breath, smoothing the fabric of my emerald green dress. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk, retrieving my heavy gold-plated corporate seal. I grabbed a sleek black fountain pen, testing the ink on a scrap of paper to ensure it flowed perfectly. I walked to the heavy mahogany door of my office, unlocking the deadbolt with a sharp, decisive click. I stepped out into the quiet hallway, leaving the safety of my sanctuary behind. I walked back toward the dining room, my heels hitting the floor with absolute, unwavering confidence. Julian believed he was minutes away from becoming a multimillionaire. My parents believed they were minutes away from saving their corrupt megachurch. Khloe believed she was minutes away from securing her golden future with my husband. They were all sitting around my dining table, eagerly waiting for me to surrender my crown. I pushed the dining room doors open, stepping into the warm light of the chandeliers. I held the gold corporate seal in my left hand and the black pen in my right. Julian's eyes lit up with ravenous greed the moment he saw the tools of his salvation. He quickly pushed the manila folder across the mahogany table, sliding it directly into my place setting. "You got the seal, baby," Julian said, his voice trembling with barely contained excitement. "That is perfect. Just sign on the dotted lines, stamp the bottom, and you can finally go upstairs and rest your beautiful mind. I will take care of everything else." I walked slowly toward my chair, my eyes locking onto the legal documents that would strip me of my freedom. I was about to give them exactly what they asked for, but the cost of this transaction would be their absolute destruction. I took my seat at the head of the table, placing the heavy gold corporate seal down with a deliberate echoing thud. Julian hovered over me like a vulture circling a wounded animal. He tapped the thick manila folder, his eyes practically vibrating with unregulated greed. He was so entirely consumed by the prospect of gaining my $5 million empire that he did not notice my left hand sliding smoothly beneath the edge of the mahogany table, gripping my encrypted secondary phone. Before I signed away my life, my sanity, and my company, I needed absolute confirmation that the invisible snare I had built around this dining room was fully operational. I needed to know that the steel jaws of the trap had officially snapped shut. Underneath the table, hidden from the predatory gazes of my parents and my husband, my phone screen illuminated with a sequence of high-priority alerts. The counter-offensive had been executed at lightning speed. My lead corporate attorney, a ruthless litigator who operated with military precision, had sent a single encrypted confirmation code. Protocol Black was live. In the span of a few short minutes while I was in my home office, my entire financial universe had been fundamentally restructured. Every single joint account I shared with Julian was now completely frozen. The routing numbers were deactivated, the debit cards were canceled, and the credit lines were slashed to absolute zero. But freezing the accounts was only the first layer of my defense. My primary assets, the massive commercial real estate holdings, the crisis management agency's operating capital, and the multi-million-dollar investment portfolios had been seamlessly transferred into an impenetrable, irrevocable blind trust. Julian could forge my signature on 1,000 power of attorney documents tonight, and it would not matter in the slightest. He was attempting to rob a vault that had already been emptied. Furthermore, the legal team had officially triggered the default clauses in our prenuptial agreement. By attempting to defraud me, and by violating the fidelity clauses, Julian had legally forfeited any right to spousal support, alimony, or property division. He was not just broke. He was a financial ghost. I kept my face perfectly blank, projecting the image of a defeated, exhausted woman, while internally, the adrenaline of absolute victory surged through my veins. I glanced across the table at Khloe. She was casually sipping her sparkling water, entirely oblivious to the fact that her luxurious, heavily funded fantasy world was actively burning to the ground. She was still basking in the glow of her fraudulent pregnancy announcement, waiting for Julian to secure the bag so they could begin their twisted life together. My phone vibrated again against my palm. It was a secure text message from Darius, who was still stationed out on the darkened patio. Through the glass French doors, I could see his silhouette, the faint glowing ember of his cigar cutting through the Atlanta night. The message on my screen was brief, clinical, and completely devastating. "I froze her black card 20 minutes ago," Darius wrote, his digital tone as icy as his demeanor. "Burn it all down, Nia." I allowed a microscopic, razor-sharp smile to touch the corners of my mouth. Darius had severed Khloe's financial lifelines with the exact same ruthless efficiency I had used on Julian. She had no access to his generational wealth. She had no access to the joint accounts. She was sitting in my dining room wearing a $5,000 designer dress, utterly unaware that she could not even afford to buy a cup of coffee tomorrow morning. She was a queen without a kingdom, resting her hand on a stomach that held the ultimate proof of her betrayal. I typed my response to Darius using only my thumb, keeping my movements completely hidden beneath the linen tablecloth. Give me exactly 15 minutes. The final piece of the puzzle required securing my star witness. I opened my offshore banking application, bypassing the biometric security wall with a swift swipe. I verified the transaction I had initiated from my office. The $50,000 wire transfer to Sierra's account had successfully cleared. The funds were instantly available, ensuring the terrified young bank intern had the immediate financial security she needed to disappear into the safe house my private security team had prepared for her. Sierra was no longer a panicked, disposable mistress. She was a fully funded, protected asset, completely insulated from Julian's desperate retaliation. Seconds after the wire transfer confirmation appeared, my secure email inbox chimed. Sierra had delivered exactly what she promised. A heavily encrypted PDF file arrived containing high-resolution photographs of every single document hidden inside Julian's leather briefcase. I opened the file, and the horrifying reality of my husband's betrayal glowed brightly on the small screen. There it was, the $5 million life insurance policy fully executed with my forged signature listing Julian as the sole and uncontestable beneficiary. Below it were the digital receipts from the underground clinic in Decatur. The itemized list of high-dose abortifacients and heavy animal sedatives stared back at me, a clinical itemized receipt for the attempted murder of my unborn child. The sheer overwhelming evil of those documents threatened to break my composure, but I forced the maternal rage down, compressing it into a tight, volatile sphere of pure calculation. I took a slow, deep breath, flooding my lungs with oxygen, preparing to execute my family, both publicly and legally. I locked the phone and slid it back into my pocket, bringing both of my hands up to rest on top of the mahogany dining table. The digital preparations were complete. The financial blockades were active. The evidence was secured. The police were en route. All that remained was the psychological execution. Julian slid the manila folder closer to me, eagerly tapping the designated signature line with his manicured index finger. "It is all right here, baby." Julian coaxed his voice, adopting that sickening, patronizing tone he used when he thought he was winning. "Just the standard medical proxy and the financial power of attorney. It gives me the legal authority to handle the agency's payroll, manage the real estate properties, and make sure your medical team can give you the absolute best psychiatric care available. You do not have to worry about a single thing anymore." I looked down at the neatly typed legal documents. They were incredibly thorough. Julian had clearly paid a very expensive, very unethical lawyer to draft papers that essentially stripped me of my human rights. If I signed my name on that dotted line, I would legally become a ward of my husband. I would have no voice, no agency, and no access to my own wealth. I would be trapped in whatever secluded mountain facility my mother had chosen, pumped full of sedatives while Julian and Khloe drained my bank accounts and lived in my Buckhead estate. I picked up the black fountain pen, holding it lightly between my fingers. I let the tip of the pen hover just millimeters above the signature line. Julian stopped breathing. I could physically feel the greedy, desperate anticipation radiating from his body. My mother leaned forward, her eyes locked onto the pen. "Just sign it, Nia." Vivian urged, her voice tight with impatience. "Stop making this so incredibly difficult. We have a reputation to uphold in this city. You are sick, and Julian is doing you a massive favor by covering up your mental breakdown. Do it for the family. Do it so your father can handle his church business by Monday morning." My father nodded solemnly, adjusting his clerical collar, as if preparing to give a benediction over my financial corpse. "The Lord demands obedience, Nia. Signing that paper is an act of spiritual surrender. It is the only way to cleanse your mind of these paranoid delusions." I looked at my mother's expensive pearls paid for by the congregation she secretly despised. I looked at my father's tailored pastoral suit funded by the $500,000 he had embezzled from the church building fund. I looked at Khloe's smug, victorious smile resting her hand on the child she had conceived with my husband. And finally, I looked at Julian's greedy, terrified eyes. A man perfectly willing to poison his pregnant wife to pay off a Russian gambling syndicate. They were all staring at me, waiting for the strong black woman to finally collapse under the weight of their manipulation. They were waiting for me to surrender the empire I had built with my own hands. I let the silence stretch, expanding until the tension in the dining room became physically suffocating. I let them taste the absolute certainty of their victory for just a few seconds longer. Then I lowered the pen. I did not write my name. I did not sign away my life. Instead, I pressed the gold nib of the pen firmly against the center of the document and slowly, deliberately snapped the expensive writing instrument perfectly in half. The sharp crack echoed through the dining room like a gunshot, shattering the illusion of their triumph into 1,000 jagged pieces. Black ink bled from the fractured pen, pooling onto the pristine white surface of the medical proxy. The dark liquid spread rapidly across the signature line, ruining the very document Julian needed to steal my empire. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. The sheer audacity of my defiance paralyzed them. In their minds, the strong black woman was supposed to break under patriarchal authority and maternal guilt. I was supposed to sacrifice my sanity to save their reputations. Instead, I had just vandalized their golden ticket. Julian let out a strangled gasp, lunging to snatch the ruined documents away from the spreading ink. He patted the paper frantically with his bare hands, smearing the black stains further across the legal jargon. His perfectly groomed facade was completely gone now, replaced by the raw, unhinged panic of a man watching his life slip through his fingers. He looked at the broken pieces of the gold pen resting on the mahogany table, then up at my face. His chest heaved. He was terrified, but he still thought he could manipulate his way out of the corner. "What is wrong with you?" Julian shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He waved the ink-stained papers in the air. "This was for your own good, Nia. You are completely out of control. Look at what you just did. You are having a violent episode right in front of your parents. You need help immediately." My mother stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. Her face contorted with absolute fury. Her pearl necklace clicked against her chest as she pointed a shaking finger at me. "How dare you behave this way in front of us?" Vivian shrieked, dropping all pretense of maternal concern. "Your husband goes out of his way to protect you from your own aggressive masculine tendencies, and you repay him by throwing a tantrum like a spoiled child. You are embarrassing this family. You are embarrassing me. If you do not sign a fresh copy of those documents right now, I will personally call the hospital and tell them my daughter is a danger to herself." My father stepped in, using his commanding pastoral presence to try and crush my rebellion. "Nia, you are walking in the spirit of pride and rebellion." Gerald boomed, his voice vibrating with manufactured religious authority. "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. You are fighting against the divine order of this household. Julian is your head, and you are acting like a Jezebel. You will sit down, you will ask your husband for forgiveness, and you will sign whatever he puts in front of you." I remained standing. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I looked at the three of them, observing their desperate, pathetic attempts to force me back into the box they had built for me. They had spent my entire life chipping away at my self-worth, convincing me that my value was tied entirely to my ability to fund their lifestyles. They thought their words still held power over me. They were severely mistaken. "There will be no fresh copies," I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute chilling authority. The temperature in the dining room plummeted. "I am not going to a psychiatric facility, Mom. I am not stepping down from my company. And I am certainly not handing my financial portfolio over to a man who is actively trying to murder me." The word hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Murder. Khloe stopped scrolling on her phone, her head snapping up in confusion. Gerald froze, his mouth half open, the scripture dying on his tongue. Vivian blinked rapidly, trying to process the severity of the accusation. "What are you talking about?" Julian stammered, his eyes darting frantically toward the hallway, calculating his escape routes. He took a step back, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. Nobody is trying to hurt you, baby. You are paranoid. This is exactly the kind of delusion I was talking about. You are proving my point. I ignored him and turned my piercing gaze entirely onto my father. Let us talk about your tax audit, Dad, I said, watching the color instantly drain from his face. The $500,000 penalty the IRS is demanding by Monday morning. The penalty for the building fund money you embezzled to pay for Mom's country club memberships and your custom suits. Gerald stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of his dining chair. His pastoral arrogance vanished, replaced by the sheer terror of a criminal who had just been caught. Vivian let out a quiet, strangled gasp, her hands flying to her throat. You thought you could hide your federal crimes by selling me to Julian. I continued, my voice slicing through their hypocrisy like a scalpel. Julian promised to write you a $500,000 check from my corporate accounts as soon as I was locked away in a padded cell. You were perfectly willing to let my husband declare me legally insane just so you could avoid a federal indictment and keep playing the righteous pastor on Sunday mornings. You sold your own daughter for $500,000. That is a lie, Vivian screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. She looked at her husband seeking reassurance, but Gerald could not meet her eyes. His silence was a damning confession. Vivian turned back to me, her face flushed with defensive rage. You have no proof of any of this. You are making up sick, twisted lies because your brain is broken. I am not broken, Mom. I am the only person in this room who is seeing reality clearly. I turned my attention back to Julian, who was edging closer to the dining room exit. And Julian did not want to commit me just to help Dad pay off his embezzlement charges. Julian needs my money because he is $2 million in debt to a Russian gambling syndicate operating out of Miami. Julian froze mid-step. His entire body went rigid. The color completely left his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He opened his mouth to deny it, but his vocal cords refused to cooperate. They gave him a deadline, I explained to the room, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. If he does not pay the $2 million by the end of the month, they are going to kill him. He is broke. He has been funneling his bank salary to his bookies for years, so he came up with a brilliant, desperate plan. He took out a $5 million life insurance policy on me exactly 2 weeks ago. He is the sole beneficiary. Khloe let out a sharp, genuine gasp. She looked at Julian, her eyes wide with sudden, terrifying realization. She had thought Julian was a wealthy, successful man who was going to rescue her from her boring marriage to Darius. Hearing that her secret lover was actually a degenerate gambler facing a death mark from a cartel completely shattered her glamorous illusion. Julian, tell them she is crazy, Khloe demanded, her voice trembling with panic. Tell them she is making this up. Julian could not speak. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly around the room. The trap had closed around him, and the steel teeth were digging into his bones. He could not just murder me outright. I continued detailing his horrific strategy with clinical precision. It would look too suspicious, so he decided to use the heavy pressure of my crisis management firm against me. He bought black market animal sedatives and illegal, high-dose abortifacients from a warehouse clinic in Decatur. He put them in the gumbo tonight. He wanted to induce a violent, traumatic medical emergency right here in front of my family. He knew my parents would gladly believe I was having a psychotic break. He wanted to lock me away, seize my accounts, pay off his cartel debt, and cover Dad's embezzlement. And if that did not work, the drugs in the soup were strong enough to cause a fatal complication, triggering the $5 million insurance payout. You are insane! Julian finally screamed, his voice cracking with absolute raw desperation. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You have absolutely no proof of any of this. You are a paranoid, psychotic woman making up a wild conspiracy theory because you cannot handle the stress of your job. Nobody is going to believe a single word you are saying. I am calling the hospital right now to get you committed. Julian rapidly reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his cell phone. His hands were shaking so violently, he nearly dropped the expensive device onto the mahogany floorboards. He tapped the cracked screen, trying to dial the emergency number. He genuinely believed that he could still control the false narrative completely. Julian held his phone to his ear, his thumb hovering over the call button. I did not move to stop him. I did not yell. I simply reached into the concealed side pocket of my emerald dress, bypassing my phone, and pulled out my sleek silver iPad mini. The device had been synced to the estate's central command system since the day I purchased the property. With a single fluid motion, I tapped the master control application. A soft electronic chime echoed through the dining room as the system confirmed my biometric override. Julian, I said, my voice cutting through his frantic dialing. Before you ask the emergency dispatcher to send an ambulance for your psychotic wife, you might want to listen to a message from your intern. Julian froze. His eyes darted from his phone to the iPad resting flat on the palm of my hand. He did not understand what I was doing, but the mention of his intern paralyzed his thumb. I swiped down on the screen and tapped the red play icon on the audio file I had saved just an hour earlier in the master bathroom. Instantly, the state-of-the-art surround sound speakers embedded invisibly in the dining room ceiling roared to life. The crystal-clear, uncompressed audio of Sierra sobbing hysterically filled the entire first floor of the mansion. The volume was set to absolute maximum. Her terrified voice bounced off the mahogany walls, vibrating the crystal wine glasses on the table. Please tell me you did not eat the gumbo. Tell me you are safe, Sierra's voice screamed from the speakers above our heads. Julian dropped his phone. The expensive device hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack, the screen splintering instantly. He stumbled backward, his hands flying up to his head, as if he could physically block out the sound of his own destruction. My name is Sierra. I am 24. I work as an intern at the downtown bank branch. Julian is my manager, and I am his mistress. I have been sleeping with him for 6 months. Khloe let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She gripped the edge of the dining table, her knuckles turning bone white as she stared at the ceiling, listening to her secret lover's other mistress confess her existence to the entire room. The golden child's perfectly crafted illusion of being Julian's exclusive prize completely shattered in real time. He took out a $5 million life insurance policy on you just 2 weeks ago. Sierra's recorded voice continued, her panic escalating into raw terror. He is the sole beneficiary, and the policy includes an accelerated payout clause for sudden accidental death or fatal medical complications. My mother, Vivian, physically recoiled. She pressed her back hard against her dining chair, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was finally penetrating her thick armor of narcissism and societal pride. She looked at Julian, the man she had just fiercely defended, the man she had trusted to cover up her husband's embezzlement, and she saw a murderer. Receipts. The audio boomed relentlessly. There were crumpled receipts from a black market clinic operating out of a warehouse in Decatur. They were high-dose abortifacients, illegal industrial-strength chemicals used to terminate pregnancies mixed with heavy animal tranquilizers and sedatives. He bought them yesterday in cash. My father, Gerald, slumped heavily in his chair. The booming, authoritative pastor who had just commanded me to submit to my husband was now hyperventilating. His chest heaved as he stared at the overturned bowl of gumbo soaking into his daughter's rug. He realized he had just spent the last 20 minutes aggressively encouraging me to consume a lethal, chemical cocktail designed to butcher his unborn grandchild. "Shut it off!" Julian shrieked, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical pitch. He lunged toward the wall panel near the kitchen door, slamming his fists against the smart home touchscreen in a desperate, frantic attempt to kill the audio. "Nia, shut it off right now. She is lying. This is a deep fake. You manufactured this audio to frame me." I ignored his pathetic screaming. I tapped a button on my iPad, locking the control panel he was currently smashing his fists against. The system denied his access with a harsh red error light. "It is the Russian bookies," Sierra's voice cried out, delivering the final fatal blow to Julian's reputation. Julian does not just manage bank accounts. He gambles. He has been gambling offshore for 3 years. He owes nearly $2 million to an underground syndicate operating out of Miami. They gave him a deadline of the end of the month. If he does not pay the $2 million, they promise to dismember him. Julian abandoned the wall panel and spun around his chest, heaving, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He looked like a cornered rat facing an oncoming train. The audio file ended with a sharp click, leaving a ringing, suffocating silence in its wake. The sheer volume of the confession had physically rattled the room, but the quiet that followed was far more terrifying. I calmly reached under the linen tablecloth and retrieved the thick stack of printed documents I had covertly pulled from my secure briefcase while in my office. I had printed the files Sierra sent me, ensuring I had physical, undeniable proof to complement the digital execution. I stood up slowly, towering over the ruins of my family's treacherous conspiracy. I raised my hand and forcefully slammed the printed $5 million life insurance policy directly onto the center of the mahogany table. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the wood made my mother jump in her seat. I placed the black market clinic receipts right next to it, smoothing the paper out so the itemized list of abortifacients was clearly visible to everyone sitting at the table. "You wanted me committed, Julian?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register that left zero room for argument. "Or did you just want me dead, so you could pay off your $2 million gambling debt to the cartel?" Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed by the insurmountable mountain of evidence I had just dropped onto his lap. The narrative he had spent weeks meticulously crafting had been entirely obliterated in less than 3 minutes. He could no longer hide behind his charming smile. He could no longer rely on my parents' greed to manipulate me into submission. The truth was violently, undeniably exposed. Vivian stared at the life insurance policy, her eyes tracing the forged signature at the bottom of the page. She slowly turned her head to look at Julian, her face contorted with a mixture of horror and betrayal. She had been perfectly willing to let him lock me in a psychiatric ward to protect her husband's church, but discovering that he planned to violently murder me and steal $5 million crossed a line even her narcissistic mind could not comprehend. "You were going to kill her," Vivian whispered, her voice shaking with genuine fear. "You sat at my table, smiled in my face, and tried to feed my daughter poison." Gerald grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white as he struggled to process the severity of the situation. He looked at the clinic receipts, realizing the horrific implications of the chemicals listed. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with sudden, terrifying comprehension. "Nia," Gerald stammered, his pastoral voice completely broken. "The chemicals, the clinic, are you pregnant?" "Yes, Dad," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. "I am 8 weeks pregnant." Julian knew. He researched exactly what dosage of industrial chemicals it would take to induce a violent, agonizing miscarriage right here in this dining room. He wanted to use the trauma of losing my child to convince you that I had suffered a complete psychotic break. And the sickest part is, he knew you would eagerly help him lock me away if he promised to cover up your federal tax evasion. Gerald flinched violently as if I had physically struck him across the face. The mention of his own crimes snapping him back to his own precarious reality. Julian finally found his voice, stepping away from the wall and raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Baby, please. Please listen to me. That intern is crazy. She is a stalker. She is obsessed with me, and she made all of this up to destroy our marriage. I would never hurt you. I would never hurt our baby. I love you, Nia. You have to believe me." I did not blink. I reached into the stack of documents and pulled out the final piece of paper I had printed. I held it up for him to see, ensuring the bold black text was clearly legible. It was the wire transfer confirmation proving he had sent a $10,000 down payment to the underground clinic in Decatur. "A stalker did not wire $10,000 from your hidden offshore account to a black market chemical supplier." "Julian," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "A stalker did not forge my signature on a $5 million life insurance policy. You did. You rolled the dice with my life and you lost." Julian realized the manipulation tactic was dead. The panic shifted instantly into a dark, feral rage. He took a heavy step toward me, his hands curling into tight fists at his sides. The charming, supportive husband mask completely dissolved, revealing the violent, desperate predator hiding underneath. He realized he was not going to get the $5 million. He was not going to get the $500,000 to buy my father's silence. He was going to face the Russian cartel empty-handed, and they were going to butcher him. You think you are so smart? Julian snarled, his voice dropping into a guttural, terrifying growl. You think you can just snap your fingers and destroy my life? You think I am just going to let you walk away from this? I stood my ground, my posture perfectly rigid, my eyes locked onto his. I am not just going to walk away, Julian, I replied, my voice devoid of any fear. I am going to make sure you never see the light of day again. Julian stood frozen, his mind desperately searching for a way out of the inescapable trap I had just sprung. He glanced at the French doors, evaluating whether he could make a run for his car, but the security protocol I had initiated meant my armed guards were already surrounding the perimeter of the estate. There was absolutely no escape for him. I looked at my mother, who was still staring at the printed life insurance policy as if it were a venomous snake resting on her dining table. She had spent her entire life prioritizing appearances over authenticity, valuing the aesthetic of a successful family over the actual well-being of her children. Now, she was forced to confront the horrific reality that her superficial standards had nearly cost her eldest daughter her life. My father sat paralyzed in his chair, the weight of his own hypocrisy pressing down on his chest. He had used scripture to demand my submission to a man who was actively plotting my murder. He had weaponized his religious authority to facilitate a horrific crime, all to protect his own corrupt legacy. The devastation in his eyes was not born of regret for my suffering. It was born of the terrifying realization that his carefully constructed empire of lies was rapidly collapsing around him. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating, wrapping around the occupants of the room like a tightening noose. The grand, luxurious dining room with its crystal chandeliers and imported mahogany furniture had been transformed into an execution chamber. I stood at the head of the table, the unrivaled architect of their downfall, watching the ashes of their deceit settle around them. The reversal was complete, but the reckoning had only just begun. I was not finished dismantling this toxic family. The hardest blow was yet to come. The silence in the dining room hung heavy, thick with the stench of Julian's exposed crimes. But my sister Khloe could not stand the quiet. She could not stand that the narrative had violently shifted away from her triumphant pregnancy announcement. Her perfect manicured reality was threatened by the explosive truth I had just laid on the table, and her instinct was to attack. She slammed her hands down on the mahogany surface, pushing herself up from her chair. Her face was flushed with indignant rage. "You are lying!" Khloe screamed, her shrill voice shattering the tension in the room. "You manufactured all of this. You run a crisis management firm, Nia. You have access to top-tier technology and audio engineers. You probably use some artificial intelligence software to fake that girl's voice and create that audio recording. You are just insanely jealous. You have always been jealous of me, and now you are trying to ruin my husband and my pregnancy announcement with this elaborate, psychotic hoax." Julian, desperate for a lifeline, eagerly latched onto Khloe's ridiculous defense. "Yes," Julian gasped, pointing a shaking finger at me. "That is exactly what she did. She faked the audio. She faked the receipts. She is a professional manipulator trying to frame me because she has lost her mind. Khloe is absolutely right." I did not raise my voice. I did not even blink. I simply turned my head and locked my eyes directly onto my younger sister. The golden child of the family, the former Spelman pageant queen, who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself, was standing there, defending the man who had just tried to poison me. She was desperately clinging to her secret lover, completely unaware that the ground beneath her feet had already caved in. I let her finish her frantic, pathetic rant. I let her breathe heavily, her chest heaving as she glared at me with absolute hatred. "Congratulations on the baby, Khloe," I said, my voice echoing with a smooth, terrifying calm that instantly silenced the room. I kept my gaze fixed on her face, watching her triumphant expression falter. "It is a beautiful blessing. It really is. It is just a massive shame that its father is about to go to a federal penitentiary for attempted murder and wire fraud." Vivian gasped loudly, her hand flying to her chest. Gerald furrowed his brow, stepping forward. "What are you talking about, Nia?" my father demanded, his voice trembling. Darius is the father of that child. You are speaking madness again. I reached under the linen tablecloth one final time. I pulled out the printed medical documents I had secured from the encrypted flash drive Darius had given me. I stood up tall, projecting absolute unwavering authority. With a swift, forceful motion, I threw the thick stack of medical files directly onto the center of the dining table. The papers fanned out perfectly, sliding right in front of Khloe and Julian. "Read them," I commanded. "Read the certified laboratory reports from the fertility clinic. Read the DNA profiling. Julian is the father of Khloe's baby. They have been having an affair for 2 years, spending my hard-earned money in luxury hotels across the country, while laughing behind my back." Khloe looked down at the medical files. Her eyes darted across the clinical diagnoses, the dates, the irrefutable scientific proof of her ultimate betrayal. The blood instantly vanished from her face, leaving her light skin a sickly, translucent shade of gray. Her knees buckled slightly, hitting the edge of the dining table. She looked at Julian in absolute horror, realizing that her perfectly guarded secret was exposed to the harsh, unforgiving light of reality. Before Khloe could formulate a single word of denial, the heavy glass French doors leading to the outdoor patio swung open. A cool gust of Atlanta evening air swept into the stifling dining room. Darius stepped inside. He moved with a slow, deliberate, and entirely stoic grace. His tailored suit was immaculate. His posture was rigid. He did not look like a heartbroken, betrayed husband. He looked like an executioner who had just finished sharpening his blade. Darius walked methodically across the dining room, his expensive leather shoes making no sound against the hardwood floor. He stopped directly behind Khloe's chair. Khloe slowly turned her head to look at him, her lips trembling, her eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic plea for mercy. Darius did not offer any. He did not shout. He did not curse. He simply raised his left hand, his long fingers gripping his heavy platinum wedding band. With a smooth, effortless motion, he slid the ring off his finger. He held it suspended in the air for a fraction of a second before dropping it directly into Khloe's half-full crystal champagne flute. The heavy platinum ring hit the bottom of the glass with a sharp, resonant clink that echoed violently through the silent room. "My lawyer filed the divorce papers an hour ago," Darius stated, his deep voice carrying the chilling resonance of absolute finality. "The paperwork is already processing through the Fulton County court system. Under the strict infidelity clause written into our prenuptial agreement, an agreement you eagerly signed because you thought you were outsmarting me, you walk away with absolutely nothing. You do not get the house, you do not get the cars, you do not get a single dime of alimony or spousal support." Khloe let out a strangled, breathless whine, reaching out to grab Darius's suit jacket. "Darius, please," she begged, tears spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. "Please listen to me. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. I love you." Darius smoothly stepped back, avoiding her touch with visible disgust. "Do not insult my intelligence, Khloe," he replied, his tone remaining perfectly level. "You have been sleeping with your sister's husband in luxury hotel suites funded by her credit cards. You thought I was a quiet, oblivious fool who would happily raise another man's bastard child while funding your high society shopping sprees. You vastly underestimated me. And since I instructed my legal team to freeze your black card 20 minutes ago, you currently have exactly $0 to your name. I suggest you ask your baby daddy to pay for your Uber home." "Oh, wait," Darius added, tilting his head slightly as he looked at a hyperventilating Julian. "He is completely broke and he is about to be arrested." The reality of her total destruction finally crashed down onto Khloe's shoulders. The golden child, the flawless, pampered princess of the family, realized she had just lost everything in the span of 60 seconds. She had no money, no wealthy husband, no social standing, and she was carrying the child of a degenerate, murderous gambler. Khloe's legs gave out completely. She collapsed heavily into her dining chair, throwing her arms across the mahogany table. She buried her face in her hands and began to wail hysterically. It was not a delicate, pretty cry. It was a loud, ugly, guttural scream of absolute defeat. She sobbed violently, her chest heaving as the consequences of her profound arrogance tore her reality to shreds. Vivian and Gerald stood frozen, watching their favorite daughter unravel in spectacular, humiliating fashion. Their perfect, socially acceptable world was disintegrating right in front of their eyes. Vivian clutched her pearls, her mouth opening and closing silently. She could not find the words to defend Khloe now. There was no spinning this narrative for her sorority sisters. The pastor's daughter was pregnant by her own sister's husband, and she had just been dumped and left destitute in front of everyone. Gerald looked at Darius, attempting to muster some sort of pastoral authority to salvage the situation, but the sheer icy contempt in Darius's eyes forced my father to look away in deep, burning shame. Julian leaned against the wall, sliding down slowly until he hit the floor. The revelation that Darius knew everything, that the divorce was filed, and that the financial tap was permanently shut off, destroyed his last shred of hope. He looked at Khloe, the woman he had risked his life and freedom to be with, and he saw nothing but a liability. They were both drowning, and neither had a life raft. I stood at the head of the table, observing the wreckage with absolute, unyielding satisfaction. For 32 years, I had been the family scapegoat. I had been the dark-skinned, hard-working daughter whose achievements were constantly minimized to ensure Khloe's mediocre accomplishments could shine. My parents had groomed Khloe to be a wealthy man's trophy, teaching her that her light skin and pageant smiles were her greatest assets. They had taught her that rules did not apply to her, that consequences were for other people. Tonight she had finally met her consequence, and it was devastating. Darius had executed his departure with flawless clinical precision. He did not raise his voice. He did not curse. He simply removed his resources and walked away, leaving the parasite to starve. Khloe's wailing echoed loudly, vibrating against the crystal chandeliers. She reached across the table, blindly grasping at the ruined medical proxy documents, her manicured nails catching on the ink-stained paper. She looked up at Julian, her face contorted in an ugly mask of desperation. "Julian, do something!" Khloe screamed, her voice cracking. "Fix this! You promised me we would have her money. You promised me we would be safe. You said the plan was foolproof." Julian stared back at her with sheer hatred. The illusion of their grand, forbidden romance died the moment the funds were cut off. "Shut up, Khloe!" Julian snarled, his voice guttural and vicious. "Just shut your mouth. You ruined everything. If your idiot husband had not gone snooping around, we would have the money by now. You were supposed to keep him distracted." They were already turning on each other like starved animals in a cage. I watched them tear each other apart with a cold, analytical fascination. The loyalty between thieves never lasts when the vault is empty. "You both ruined yourselves," I stated, my voice slicing through their pathetic bickering. "You built an entire relationship on a foundation of my money and Darius's patience. You thought you were the smartest people in the room. You thought you could orchestrate a murder, a psychiatric commitment, and a massive financial theft without leaving a single trace. But you left a trail of digital breadcrumbs a mile wide, and you underestimated the people you were trying to destroy." Darius stood by the doorway, adjusting his cuffs with a calm, indifferent motion. He looked at me, a silent exchange of mutual respect passing between us. We had both been used by this family. We had both been viewed as walking bank accounts, and tonight we had both reclaimed our freedom. "I will leave you to handle the rest of the trash, Nia," Darius said smoothly, turning his back on his hysterical, weeping wife. "My driver is waiting out front. Good luck with the authorities." With that, Darius walked out of the dining room, out of the house, and out of Khloe's life forever. Khloe screamed his name one last time, a desperate, agonizing sound that went entirely unanswered. She buried her head in her arms, sobbing uncontrollably into the mahogany table. The golden child had officially fallen, and there was absolutely no one left to catch her. With Darius gone and Khloe reduced to a weeping, hyperventilating mess on the mahogany table, the oppressive silence in the dining room shattered. My father Gerald, realizing that the protective bubble of his pastoral authority was rapidly collapsing, decided to make his move. Like any cornered rat facing the destruction of a sinking ship, Gerald chose self-preservation over loyalty. He abruptly turned his back on his favorite daughter and locked his terrified, desperate eyes onto Julian. The man of God abandoned the man he had just anointed as the head of my household without a single ounce of hesitation. "You degenerate monster!" Gerald bellowed, his voice vibrating with a sudden manufactured righteous fury. He pointed a shaking accusatory finger at my husband, who was still slumped on the hardwood floor against the wall. "You brought this pure evil into my home. You sat at my table, you broke bread with my family, and you plotted to murder my eldest daughter. You are a wolf in sheep clothing. You are a demon sent from the lowest pits of hell to destroy the righteous legacy of the Greater Faith Fellowship." I watched my father pivot into his theatrical pulpit performance with absolute freezing disgust. Just 10 minutes ago, he was aggressively demanding my total submission to this exact same man. He had eagerly weaponized sacred scripture to force me into a psychiatric facility so he could secure a $500,000 bribe. Now he was desperately trying to rewrite the narrative in real time. He was attempting to position himself as a wholly oblivious victim who had been cleverly deceived by a wicked son-in-law. Julian did not even attempt to defend himself against my father's booming accusations. He remained on the floor, his knees pulled up to his chest, staring blankly at the dark gumbo stains ruining the expensive rug. The crushing reality of his $2 million cartel debt and his impending federal prison sentence had completely short-circuited his brain. He was a hollow, empty shell. Gerald took a deep breath, smoothing his hands over the lapels of his custom-tailored suit. He turned his attention back to me, instantly dropping the aggressive volume. He adopted a soft, soothing, falsely compassionate tone, the exact voice he used to comfort grieving families during expensive church funerals. "Nia, praise the Almighty God that the truth has been brought to the light tonight," Gerald said, stepping closer to my chair, but keeping a cautious distance from the destroyed legal documents on the table. "The Lord has truly delivered you from the snare of the fowler. We have uncovered this profound darkness. We must deal with Julian immediately and severely, but my child, we must do it quietly. We must proceed with absolute discretion." I did not move a single muscle. I kept my posture perfectly rigid, my face a mask of impenetrable stone. "Discretion. Dad, please explain to me why the attempted murder of your pregnant daughter requires discretion." Gerald swallowed hard, glancing nervously toward the large windows facing the street. "Because the Greater Faith Fellowship cannot be dragged into a scandalous public spectacle, Nia. You know how the media operates in Atlanta. You know how vicious the bloggers and the news stations can be when a prominent black pastor is involved in a family controversy. If the congregation finds out that my son-in-law is a degenerate gambler who plotted a murder, the backlash will destroy the ministry. The board of elders will demand a public inquiry. We must protect the holy name of the church. We will handle your divorce and Julian's departure privately. There is no need to involve the authorities." I let out a slow, sharp laugh that held absolutely no humor. It was a cold, metallic sound that made my mother flinch in her seat. "Protect the church," I repeated, my voice rising with a terrifying, undeniable clarity. "Protect the holy name of the ministry. Do you mean the exact same church you have been actively embezzling from for the past 5 years?" Vivian gasped sharply, her hands flying to her throat as if she were suffocating. "Nia, lower your voice right now," my mother hissed, her eyes darting frantically around the room as if the walls themselves were recording our conversation. "You are speaking madness. You do not know what you are saying. You are letting your anger cloud your judgment." "I am operating with more clarity right now than I have in my entire 32 years of life," I stated, reaching under the heavy linen tablecloth. I pulled out a sleek black leather portfolio that I had retrieved from my home office safe alongside the corporate seal. I tossed the portfolio onto the center of the mahogany table, directly on top of the ruined medical proxy Julian had tried to force me to sign. "I knew about your massive IRS tax audit long before Julian came to you with his disgusting, murderous bargain," I explained, locking my eyes entirely onto my father's sweating face. "I am the chief executive officer of a top-tier crisis management firm, Dad. I pay highly skilled forensic accountants and data analysts to monitor federal tax flags on prominent nonprofit organizations across the state of Georgia. It is how I source my wealthiest clients. When my automated system flagged the Greater Faith Fellowship for a severe aggressive federal audit regarding a massive discrepancy in the commercial building fund, I personally investigated the matter. Gerald stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of a dining chair. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but his charismatic voice had completely evaporated. The righteous pastor was entirely gone, leaving behind a terrified, pathetic thief who realized his ultimate judgment had finally arrived. "You did not just misplace church donations, Dad," I continued, my voice slicing through the stifling air like a scalpel. "You deliberately siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars from the congregation's working-class tithes to fund Mom's absurd country club lifestyle. You used the building fund to buy her luxury Mercedes. You used the charity outreach accounts to finance Khloe's ridiculous pageant wardrobes and her lavish sorority vacations. You built an entire empire of upper-class elitist illusion on the backs of hardworking people who trusted your spiritual leadership. And when the Internal Revenue Service finally caught you, you panicked." Vivian began to cry, but they were not tears of remorse or maternal guilt. They were the desperate, selfish tears of a narcissist who realized her glittering social status was about to be violently ripped away. "Nia, please," Vivian begged, leaning across the table with her hands clasped together in prayer. "We were going to pay the money back. Your father just made a temporary mistake. We are your family. You cannot expose us. I will be excommunicated from my sorority chapter. We will be completely ruined in Atlanta society. You have the money to fix this. You can write the check to the IRS right now and make all of this go away quietly." "You mean write the exact same $500,000 check Julian promised you?" I shot back, my voice dripping with absolute unfiltered disgust. "The $500,000 you were perfectly willing to trade my life for. You sat right there, Mom. You sat in that chair wearing pearls bought with stolen church money, and you aggressively pressured me to sign away my sanity, my freedom, and my multi-million-dollar company to a man who had just fed me black market abortion pills. You gladly sold your eldest daughter to a slaughterhouse to protect your country club memberships. You do not have a family, Vivian. You have hostages. And I am no longer playing the role of your strong black financial mule." I opened the black leather portfolio and pulled out a thick, legally binding document bearing a brilliant red notary seal. I held it up so the harsh light of the crystal chandeliers illuminated the text. The bank holding the Greater Faith Fellowship's commercial mortgage was preparing to call the loan due to the federal tax evasion flags, I explained, watching the sheer horror wash over my father's face. "They were preparing to foreclose on your entire operation, so I stepped in. Using a discreet corporate shell company, I purchased the entire commercial debt 3 days ago." Gerald let out a strange, choking sound, his hands gripping his chest as if he were experiencing a cardiac event. "You bought the church debt." "I bought the debt," I confirmed coldly. "I now own the commercial mortgage for the sanctuary where you preach your hypocritical lies every Sunday. I own the deed to the fellowship hall. And most importantly, Dad, I own the absolute, uncontestable property deed to the $2 million pastoral mansion that you and Mom currently sleep in." Vivian let out a loud, piercing wail, collapsing back into her chair. Her entire identity was tied to that sprawling parsonage. It was the crown jewel of her social standing, the venue where she hosted her elite exclusive book clubs and charity galas. Realizing that the daughter she had emotionally abused for decades now legally owned the roof over her head entirely broke her mind, broke her. "Nia, I am begging you on my hands and knees," Gerald cried out, tears streaming down his face as he took a desperate step toward me. "Have mercy on your parents. The Bible says to honor thy father and mother. Vengeance belongs to the Lord, not to you. Do not take our home. Do not take the church. We will repent. We will do whatever you ask. Just please keep this quiet." "There is no quiet anymore, Dad," I stated, dropping the deed of assignment back onto the table. "There is no sweeping this under the rug to protect your fragile egos." 10 minutes ago, while I was securing my own assets, I authorized my legal team to execute a scheduled communication protocol. A highly encrypted comprehensive digital dossier was transmitted from my corporate servers. I checked my gold watch, verifying the exact time. The execution was flawless. That dossier contained every single forged receipt, every offshore wire transfer, and every hidden bank account you used to steal from your congregation. It included all the forensic accounting proof of your massive tax evasion. That email was sent directly to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Gerald let out a devastating broken sob, burying his face in his hands. He knew federal prison was no longer a threat. It was an absolute certainty. But I did not stop with the federal authorities. I continued showing them absolutely zero mercy. I copied the entire church board of elders, every single senior deacon, and the executive leadership board of Mom's beloved sorority chapter. By the time the sun rises tomorrow morning, every influential person in the city of Atlanta will know exactly what kind of parasitic, criminal frauds you truly are. You are no longer a respected pastor, Dad. You are a federal suspect. And Mom is a social pariah who will never be allowed to show her face at a high society function ever again. Vivian was weeping hysterically now, her perfect makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. She reached out toward me, her hands trembling violently. "You are a monster, Nia. You are a cold, heartless monster. How could you destroy your own blood like this? I am simply reflecting the exact same love and loyalty you showed me tonight," I replied, my voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. "I am giving you the exact same grace you offered me when you tried to lock me in an asylum." I picked up the black leather portfolio and closed it with a sharp snap. "Since I legally own the parsonage, consider this your official binding eviction notice," I announced, looking down at the two people who had brought me into this world. "You have exactly 48 hours to pack your designer suits, your stolen jewelry, and whatever dignity you have left. At 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning, my property management firm will arrive with armed private security to change every single lock on that estate. If you or Khloe are still on the premises, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing." The sound of distant wailing sirens suddenly cut through the heavy silence of the dining room. The pitch grew louder and more frantic by the second, echoing through the affluent Buckhead neighborhood. The Atlanta Police Department and Emergency Medical Services were speeding up my private driveway. My security protocol had guided them directly to my front door. The final phase of the execution had officially arrived. The sirens signaled the absolute end of my family's reign of terror, and I stood tall at the head of my table, ready to watch them all burn. The piercing wail of police sirens tore through the affluent tranquility of my Buckhead estate, growing deafeningly loud as emergency vehicles swarmed my circular driveway. The flashing red and blue lights sliced through the darkness outside, casting violent, chaotic shadows across the crystal chandeliers and the mahogany walls of the dining room. The sound was the ultimate death knell for the elaborate, sickening illusion my family had constructed. Julian realized his absolute destruction had arrived. The multi-million-dollar insurance payout was gone. The $500,000 church bribe was gone. The escape plan with Khloe was obliterated. The Russian gambling syndicate was waiting for their $2 million, and now the authorities were parked on my front lawn. The sheer, inescapable magnitude of his failure completely shattered whatever fragile remnants of his sanity remained. He had nothing left to lose, and that realization transformed him from a calculating, manipulative coward into a feral, cornered beast. A primal, guttural roar ripped from Julian's throat. His eyes rolled back with absolute, unhinged rage. He planted his hands on the edge of the mahogany dining table and violently vaulted himself forward, launching his entire body across the expensive wood. Crystal wine glasses shattered into 1,000 pieces. Silverware clattered loudly to the floor. The ruined medical proxy and the fraudulent life insurance policy scattered into the air like worthless confetti as his tailored suit tore through the center of the table. His hands stretched out like heavy claws, aiming directly for my throat. He wanted to silence me. He wanted to punish me for outsmarting him. I did not scream. I did not step back. I stood my ground at the head of the table, my posture rigid, and my eyes locked onto his terrifying, desperate face. I knew I was completely safe. I had calculated this exact response. Before Julian could even graze the fabric of my emerald green dress, The massive custom oak double doors of my estate burst open with an explosive, deafening crash. The sound of splintering wood and heavy boots hitting the marble foyer instantly neutralized the threat. Atlanta Police Department detectives, flanked seamlessly by my elite private corporate security detail, flooded into the dining room like a highly coordinated tidal wave. My lead security director, a towering man named Marcus, reached the dining table in a fraction of a second. He intercepted Julian mid-lunge, grabbing the collar of Julian's expensive Italian suit and violently ripping him backward. Julian hit the hardwood floor with a heavy, sickening thud, the breath completely knocked out of his lungs. Before he could even attempt to recover, 3 uniformed police officers swarmed him. They pinned his arms sharply behind his back, pressing their heavy knees into his spine. The cold, metallic click of police handcuffs echoing through the dining room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. "Get off me!" Julian shrieked, thrashing wildly against the officers, his face pressed aggressively into the floorboards. "I did nothing wrong. My wife is insane. She is having a psychotic break. You have to listen to me." Nobody listened to him. The lead detective, a seasoned, sharp-eyed woman named Detective Reynolds, stepped over his struggling body and walked directly toward me. I gave her a curt, professional nod, pulling my secondary phone from my pocket and placing it firmly on the table. "The audio confession from the bank intern is saved on this device, Detective Reynolds," I stated, my voice echoing with pure, unyielding authority. The physical printouts of the black market clinic receipts, the fraudulent $5 million life insurance policy, and the wire transfer records are scattered across the table. Detective Reynolds signaled to her team. "Secure the perimeter. Nobody leaves this room." Within seconds, emergency medical technicians and crime scene investigators entered the dining room. They were carrying heavy, sterile biohazard bags and specialized testing equipment. The paramedics moved with clinical robotic efficiency, completely ignoring the chaotic sobbing of my mother and sister. They approached the mahogany table and carefully secured Julian's untouched bowl of Louisiana seafood gumbo, sealing the porcelain dish tightly inside an evidence container. 2 other technicians knelt beside my ruined chair, swabbing the dark broth that had spilled onto the Persian rug, collecting the lethal, chemical cocktail that was meant to butcher my unborn child and trigger my forced institutionalization. "You have the physical evidence for the toxicology screening," I informed the crime scene unit, watching them meticulously document the dining area. He utilized high-dose abortifacients and heavy animal sedatives purchased yesterday in Decatur. The exact chemical compounds are listed on the receipts. Julian stopped struggling. The fight completely drained from his body as he watched the paramedics seal the poisoned soup into the biohazard bags. The undeniable physical proof of his murderous conspiracy was now officially in police custody. His fate was sealed in permanent ink. He lay on the floor, his cheek resting against the cold wood tears of absolute defeat leaking from his eyes. He looked over at Khloe, silently begging his secret lover for a lifeline, but Khloe had pressed herself into the furthest corner of the room, weeping hysterically, utterly refusing to make eye contact with the man who had just ruined her life. "Julian," Detective Reynolds announced, her voice booming over the chaotic noise of the room. She stood directly over him, pulling a small notebook from her jacket. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." The famous Miranda warning hit the air like a heavy gavel. My parents watched in sheer paralyzed horror as the flawless son-in-law they had eagerly chosen over their own daughter was formally stripped of his freedom. "You are being placed under arrest for the attempted murder of a pregnant woman." Detective Reynolds continued listing the charges with cold, mechanical precision. "You are also being charged with aggressive insurance fraud, financial conspiracy, and the purchase of illegal, unregulated narcotics." Officers hauled Julian roughly to his feet. His designer suit was wrinkled and stained with spilled wine. His face was a mask of utter devastation. He looked at me one final time, his chest heaving with desperate, ragged breaths. "Nia, please." Julian begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, whimpering sob. "I am sorry. I was desperate. The cartel was going to kill me. Please, baby. Please. Do not let them take me away. I love you. We can fix this." I looked at the man I had married, feeling absolutely zero pity. I hope the Russian syndicate has good connections in the federal penitentiary system. Julian Forrest replied, my tone devoid of a single ounce of mercy. Have a wonderful life. The officers forcefully marched him out of the dining room, dragging him through the grand foyer and out the front doors. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated his disgraced, handcuffed silhouette as they shoved him into the back of a waiting squad car. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the internal rot of my family still festered in the dining room. My father, Gerald, had collapsed entirely into his chair. The booming megachurch pastor was holding his head in his hands, rocking back and forth, muttering frantic prayers under his breath. He knew the Internal Revenue Service was currently reviewing his embezzlement files. He knew he would be sharing a cell block with Julian very soon. Khloe remained curled in the corner, clutching her stomach, mourning the loss of her wealthy husband Darius and the total destruction of her elite social standing. She had absolutely nothing left. But my mother Vivian could not accept her defeat quietly. The sheer, overwhelming humiliation of having the Atlanta Police Department swarm her daughter's estate, the horrifying realization that her country club friends would see Julian's mugshot on the morning news completely broke her fragile, narcissistic reality. Vivian fell heavily to her knees on the hardwood floor. She ignored the spilled gumbo and the shattered glass gripping the edge of the mahogany dining table with shaking hands. She looked up at me, her perfect makeup ruined by ugly dark streaks of mascara. "You destroyed us!" Vivian wailed, her voice tearing through her throat in a loud, agonizing shriek. "You planned all of this just to humiliate us. You could have handled this quietly. You could have paid the church audit. You could have divorced him privately. But you had to make a public spectacle. You had to bring the police. You have completely destroyed the family legacy. The church is ruined. My sorority sisters will never speak to me again. You are a cold, heartless monster." I stood perfectly still, looking down at the woman who had spent 32 years actively tearing away at my self-esteem. She was on her knees, crying over lost social invitations and church politics, while standing inches away from the very poison that was meant to murder her unborn grandchild. Her priorities were so profoundly, irredeemably toxic that I felt entirely justified in burning her world to the ground. I looked down at her with absolute, unwavering ice in my veins. There was no legacy. Mom, I stated, my voice echoing with a calm, devastating finality that silenced her weeping instantly. I built this empire. I bought this house. I funded your entire artificial reality. The only thing you and Dad ever built was an illusion funded by stolen tithes and my hard-earned corporate money. You are not a family of high society elites. You are just a bunch of parasites wearing designer clothes. I turned to my private security director, gesturing toward the 3 broken people remaining in my dining room. "Escort them off my property immediately," I commanded, my tone shifting into pure, unbothered business. "If they resist, or if they try to take a single item from this estate, have the Atlanta Police Department arrest them for criminal trespassing." Vivian let out another piercing scream as the security guard stepped forward, firmly gripping her arms and hauling her to her feet. Gerald did not fight back. The disgraced pastor simply lowered his head in utter suffocating shame as the guards marched him toward the exit. Khloe stumbled blindly behind them, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands clutching her empty designer purse. "Get out of my house," I said, delivering the final lethal blow to their non-existent authority. "And do not ever contact me again." I stood alone at the head of my table, surrounded by the shattered glass, the spilled poison, and the heavy presence of the law enforcement officers securing the scene. The storm had finally passed, and the wreckage of my toxic family was being forcefully dragged out the front doors. I placed my hand gently over my stomach, feeling a profound, radiant sense of peace wash over my body. The strong Black woman had not broken under their pressure. She had simply rewritten the rules of engagement, executed a flawless strategy, and permanently secured her own freedom. I stepped out onto the expansive wraparound porch of my Buckhead estate, letting the cool, crisp Atlanta night air fill my lungs. Below me, the chaotic scene played out with absolute finality. My highly trained private security team physically escorted the weeping, ruined remnants of my family down the long, manicured driveway. Vivian was stumbling in her designer heels, wailing into the darkness, while Gerald shuffled beside her, completely stripped of his pastoral arrogance. Khloe trailed behind them, clutching her empty purse, a disgraced queen expelled from the kingdom she tried to steal. The heavy iron gates of my property swung shut with a resounding metallic clang, locking them out of my universe forever. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers faded into the distance, carrying Julian away to face the absolute destruction he had engineered for himself. I stood alone in the quiet aftermath, breathing in the scent of pine and rain. I placed my hand gently over my stomach, tracing the slight curve where my child was safely growing. I was completely unapologetically free. The heavy, suffocating chain of familial obligation had been permanently and violently severed. 6 months passed, and the wheels of justice ground my betrayers into absolute dust. Julian was convicted on multiple federal charges, including attempted murder, aggressive insurance fraud, and conspiracy. The audio recording from Sierra, combined with the black market receipts and the toxicological analysis of the gumbo, sealed his fate perfectly. The judge showed zero leniency, sentencing him to 20 brutal years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. He traded his tailored suits for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, and the Russian syndicate he owed $2 million was left empty-handed, a fact that surely made his prison stay incredibly perilous. Khloe experienced a catastrophic fall from grace that became legendary in Atlanta high society. The pristine, light-skinned golden child was utterly banished from the luxurious lifestyle she believed was her absolute birthright. Following the swift and merciless divorce from Darius, she was left completely destitute. The prenuptial infidelity clause ensured she did not receive a single dime. Today, Khloe is a disgraced single mother working a grueling minimum wage retail job at a discount department store. She spends her days standing on her feet scanning clearance items for customers who do not care about her former pageant titles or her Spelman degree. The wealthy men she once manipulated refuse to look in her direction, fully aware of the toxic, criminal scandal attached to her name. She is raising Julian's child in a cramped, drafty apartment completely cut off from the elite circles she once ruled with an iron fist. The devastation of my parents was even more spectacular and thoroughly deserved. The Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation descended upon the Greater Faith Fellowship with relentless, unforgiving fury. The meticulous digital dossier I provided resulted in Gerald being completely stripped of his pastoral title. The church board of elders publicly denounced him, expelling him from the pulpit he had used to fund his corruption. He is currently facing severe federal tax evasion and embezzlement charges, staring down the very real prospect of spending his retirement years in a federal cell block. Vivian suffered the ultimate social execution. The elite high society women she prized above her own flesh and blood turned on her with vicious, breathtaking speed. The executive leadership board of Alpha Kappa Alpha officially excommunicated her, stripping away the letters she wore like a regal crown. She was entirely shunned by the black elite of Atlanta. Her prestigious country club memberships were instantly revoked. Her wealthy, superficial friends permanently blocked her phone number. Since I legally owned the parsonage and executed the eviction notice, my parents were forcefully removed from the $2 million mansion by armed property managers. Destitute and disgraced, Vivian and Gerald now live in a cramped, low-income apartment in a neglected, dangerous suburb. Vivian spends her days trapped in a tiny living room surrounded by cheap secondhand furniture, entirely stripped of the pearls, the prestige, and the power she valued more than her eldest daughter's life. While they burned in the fires of their own making, my life blossomed into something extraordinarily beautiful and profound. I successfully gave birth to a healthy, perfect, and incredibly beautiful baby. Holding my child in my arms, I felt a fierce, unbreakable maternal love that my own mother had never possessed or offered to me. My crisis management firm experienced unprecedented, explosive growth. Word of my flawless, ruthless handling of my own high-profile domestic crisis spread rapidly through the corporate elite, and my company revenue absolutely skyrocketed. I expanded my operations seamlessly, securing highly lucrative contracts with some of the most powerful and influential figures in the entire country. I built an impenetrable, glorious fortress of wealth, peace, and security for myself and my child. The narrative that society forces upon us is a dangerous, lethal trap. A strong Black woman does not exist to carry the toxic, crushing weight of her ungrateful family. We are not born to be financial mules, emotional punching bags, or sacrificial lambs for people who deeply resent our brilliance. True strength is not enduring endless abuse with a polite, compliant smile. True strength is having the absolute courage to burn the entire table down when they try to serve you poison. Protect your peace at all costs. Secure your assets with absolute unapologetic ruthlessness. And never ever apologize for surviving the exact people who actively tried to bury you. You are the sovereign architect of your own empire, and absolutely nobody deserves a seat in your kingdom if they are holding a knife behind their back. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have handed them over to the authorities, or would you have walked away quietly to protect the family name? Please let me know your thoughts. Please sound off in the comments section down below right now.